Okay. So yesterday I completed the Abyss, and it was in some ways easier than expected, meaning I'm over the barrier. I'm past the wall by getting Escoffier. So maybe let's go do more stuff. One small problem. I don't remember where that cliff was.
Can we, let's hope we put up a good fight.
Up and away! A dash of frost! Let's move! Wrath from the skies! Full throttle!
Huh?
Looks like it is the thing that I was wondering about.
Rev the engines!
Alright, so first let's spend some of those here.
If you need help with carrying this stuff, I'll get Kakuku on it. Huh?
Well. Oh. That wasn't enough. My bad. If the last one goes there, this, let's say that this goblet costs a fucking 4 of those things. kinda worry about those things. But I need another one. Hmm. Oh, of course. Of course. It's all about that anyway. Sure.
Did you hear that? Sounded like an animal call. Or maybe I'm just hearing things.
Are we sure this stuff isn't expired?
Oh no, expired artifacts.
Are we sure this stuff isn't expired?
No, we aren't.
Burn it down! Full throttle! Rise with the sun!
Okay, well, that's fine. It's fine, thank you. So lucky. Or not. Ooh. Okay. Well, that's something. So one set per stuff. Hmm. Mhm. Oh. Attack percent. Sure. Mental mastery, attack percent. Okay. Hydra shield. Is there a Hydra shield in game?
Many insects have a compulsion to follow the light, and humans are the same. Except we call that light hope.
BWE has doubled and tripled down on trying to have
Instead of
people's videos
confining
taken down
themselves to
if
the
they talk
heavens,
about them. And he's
God
also
should
doubled down on
broaden their
calling me a liar
horizons
and a
and the world
defamer, which is
below.
why I'm doing this video. Mutahar has talked about him, Charlie has talked about him, and he's tried to have Mutahar's video taken down. I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to do the same thing to Charlie. I want to respond to something that BWE said over here. Plus, I cannot fight a liar with millions of subs. I'm a sole developer. This was posted to his Twitter. The real motive? It's not justice, M-dash, because everybody uses M-dashes on Twitter. This isn't about ethics, M-dash. It's about piracy, jealousy, and pushing an anti-business agenda. I went over this in this video. It's not ABC, it's XYZ with DEF. Anytime somebody does that shit, I know that they wrote what they wrote with ChatGPT. I was lazy and I fucked up and I didn't use Pandoc when I should have, and I was using ChatGPT to convert stuff from Wiki to Markdown, from Markdown to other stuff, and I told it, don't change the content of anything that I said. Simply convert from one format to the other. And I was so stupid, I deleted the chats, and I deleted the original work. So I got 60 or 80 pages of stuff at this point that has had the word make sure turned to ensure, that mentions critical, crucial, essential, critical, crucial, essential. It's not ABC, it's DEF with XYZ. M-dash, M-dash, M-dash. I have a PhD in what it's like to have ChatGPT plagiarize your homework for you. The only thing that I am more sure of than that ChatGPT wrote that Twitter post is that BWE is the exact same person as the Luan Taharaj that messed with those 13-year-old girls. I'm calling you out, and I'm saying on a camera with 2 million people that Louis Rossman thinks you're a pedophile. You said over here that it's not worth it, and I cannot fight a liar with millions of subs. And that's complete bullshit. I got a business with 8 employees that I've had for 16 years. I have a YouTube channel with 2 million subscribers. I have 2 nonprofits that have spent time advocating for right to repair around the country. I've raised money off of nothing other than my name. I go to these state legislative hearings, I testify, I get support from all these different people based on my reputation. My reputation is worth everything to me. Without my reputation, I am nothing. Without my reputation, my business is nothing. If I make these claims and they're not true, my business will probably be nothing. You could take everything away from me for saying what I just did right there, because I didn't qualify it, I didn't do no bullshit that this is not financial advice. No, I said it out loud, and it'd be very, very easy for you to prove that I'm completely full of shit. Problem here is that I didn't ask for this in the first video I did because I'm a privacy advocate. But one of the things that I had to learn, I got to learn my own lessons here. When I was talking to Mr. Steve Burke at Gamers Nexus, when I'm talking in this video, and this video over here, this one particularly between 18 minutes and 21 minutes, what I'm saying in that video is that when you're dealing with a bitch, the problem is when you try to hold the bitch to the same standard that you hold yourself to. So I would usually hold you to the same standard that I would hold myself to. Customers can walk into my store and not leave their name, their email address, or their phone number, and I will still fix their stuff. Ask for a deposit ahead of time, but I will still fix their stuff. I don't believe in asking for people's personally identifiable information for no good reason. The problem is you do. And for me to hold you to that standard when you don't hold yourself to that standard is ridiculous. You berate your own customers over this. When you take away the access to what they bought and paid for because it gives you sadistic pleasure to do so, you tell them, show me your ID. Then you make fun of them and say, is that what you show a cop? Then you say that they must not exist. Then you say that they must be inhaling lead fumes, which, by the way, it's flux fumes. Lead does not vaporize into the air until 3,000 plus Fahrenheit, you ignorant fuck. You don't even got to have a high school diploma to understand this shit.
Not a read. You ignorant fuck.
You take solder, you put it through a soldering iron, you'll see smoke come up, and then when the flux burns away in the solder, you'll notice that smoke stops going up, and you can measure this with a P-Track 8525 particle counter. And what you'll notice is that the solder stays on the iron and doesn't go anywhere, even though it's no longer smoking, because the flux is what creates the fumes, not the lead, you stupid, ignorant motherfucker. The fact that you are worse than somebody that got a 58 on his chemistry regents going to New York City public school is almost more offensive to me than what you did to those 13-year-old girls. I digress. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. As my best friend friend and great mentor, God rest his soul, Mr. Dino used to say, if you're going to be the bitch, be the whole bitch. You tell all your customers, show me your ID. I'm going to make the same request to you. Show me your fucking ID. I want to see your state identification. I want to see a state ID that can be verified by your local government. I want that state ID to match the name on your bank accounts that the money comes in for all the people who bought your software. I want that name on your state ID to line up with the transcripts from the college that you claim that you're going to. I want that state ID to match your fucking picture. If you were able to show that with all that evidence, you would be able to bury me in a fucking grave. But you're never going to show that. That's why you deleted your social media. That's why you deleted your business. That's why you got rid of everything, because you know that I'm right and you know that I got more receipts on you. Did you sign up for a website that's similar to Australians' Ticketmaster back in 2020? And if so, did you use the name Louis Taharaj when you signed up with your business email domain name of betterwayelectronics.com.au? Yeah, I didn't click on it to see that they match. But I know.
Believe me, I know.
You feel that, don't you? Right through your suit. The heat is on, Louis. There are eyewitnesses too, and there's more than one of them. And several people have already come forward with them on their YouTube channels. People that you screwed over. You think I wouldn't double check on this shit before I post this to the internet? What kind of fucking idiot do you think I am? You know how much shit that I have to lose if I'm wrong about this?
WWE has actually visited someone, and someone who we know and trust actually put eyeballs on this guy. Now, there is a newspaper article, I'll just put it there, with his disgusting face on it. So I sent that picture to this guy over DM, and
Ad asked.
yeah, there you go.
Thank you for
Confirmed kill. That is Louis.
I've looked up a lot of information on you over the past 2 weeks, Louis. A lot of stuff that I've yet to disclose. I've dug so much, I'm surprised I'm not standing right next to you in Australia right now, so that you'd have an opportunity to tell me to my face that you think I'm a liar, a cheater, and a defamer, so that you could figure out in person what happens when you say that shit to somebody's face, to a grown man born in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, rather than to a scared little blackmailed Australian girl. I would teach you a lesson that she could not, and I bet you take a very different tone with me in person than you do over the internet. I've always been a privacy advocate. Always will be. But I'm not going to make the mistake of holding scumbags to the same standard that I hold myself. I'm going to hold you to the standard that you hold yourself to. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. You want to be the bitch? Be the whole bitch. Show me your ID. You want to destroy me as a human being? You can do it with a single fucking scan. But you won't. Because I know who you are. And so do you. You know what pisses me off? I believe in second chances for everybody. I know this is going to sound messed up, but I even believe in, that's one of my biggest flaws in the world, that the people that care about me will always point out. I will always give somebody a second and third and a fourth chance. It's why I hate Darvo people, because I have an endless amount of sympathy, empathy, and willingness to give somebody a 10,000th chance after they've showed me who they are. And the thing is, in the real world, even with a sick, twisted fuck like you, I'm the type of person that would want you to have a second chance. It's a character flaw. That's why I'm okay with hiring ex-cons. I don't disqualify people because they checked the wrong box on line 14. If you have a felony conviction, I'm open to talking to you, and I'm open to giving everybody a second chance, because 99% of people, when you give them a second chance, they're going to realize they screwed up and do the right thing. The people that are the most interested in proving they're a net benefit to society, in my experience, are people that got put behind bars for being a net negative. But the problem is that there's that 1% of people, they don't hurt others as a byproduct of their issues. There's that 1% where hurting people is the point. Darvo people, they're uncurable. You were one of the lowest forms of scum in society when you committed that crime and went to prison. And when you came out as somebody who understood PlayStations better than everybody else in the industry, who created software that everybody relies on and uses, that were willing to pay for it. You were the go-to person. Everybody wants to be the Dr. House of their industry, that everybody goes to solve people is the point. Darvo people, they're uncurable.
What is Darvo? Oh. Deny attack, reverse victim and offender.
You were one of the lowest forms of scum in society when you committed that crime and went to prison. And when you came out You came out as somebody who understood PlayStations better than everybody else in the industry, who created software that everybody relies on and uses, that were willing to pay for it. You were the go-to person. Everybody wants to be the Dr. House of their industry, that everybody goes to solve the problems that nobody else can solve. There's such a dopamine rush in that, and there's such a great feeling to knowing that you're on the top of your field, that people look up to you and want to be like you and want to learn, want to troubleshoot like you. You could have been a hero. Till David versus Goliath, fighting back against companies like Sony that don't want customers to be able to fix what they bought and paid for. You had everything that you needed to have a second start for yourself. Nobody would have looked you up. If you didn't laugh at people and screw with them as you were ripping them off and fucking with them and telling them that they sound like they're inhaling lead fumes because of how stupid they are as you're revoking access to what they bought and paid for, do you think anybody would have seriously done the detective work to figure out who you are? No. You would have got to live your life as the hero that made the world a better place for people.
You had it all and you threw it away, you dumb fuck!
Macro session.
Fast food has never been good food, but it was a quick, easy, reliable, and cheap way to get a meal that appealed to people who were time poor or just, well, you know, actually poor. Mass layoffs, increasing economic uncertainty, deferred student loan payments kicking in, and spiking levels of consumer debt should be the perfect opportunity for these cheap offerings to bring in customers who don't have much money to spare, but still want to eat. For a long time, companies like McDonald's, Domino's, KFC, Taco Bell, and Wendy's were considered recession-proof, because even in the most dire of circumstances, people still need to eat, and the companies typically offered the best exchange rate of dollars to calories in the market. But that's changed. In a business move that can only be described as confusing, these brands have responded to cost-conscious, busy, and desperate consumers by becoming more expensive, slower, and less reliable. Unsurprisingly, sales across the industry have plummeted at a time when they should be outperforming. It would almost be comical if they weren't collectively some of the largest employers in the country. However, the mid-recession has been caused by more than some management missteps. It's a clear sign of some much bigger problems in the wider economy.
You know, it's supposed to be cheap, quick, and an easy option.
I personally stopped eating out at fast food for me because it got so expensive it wasn't worth the money.
McDonald's posted its biggest US sales decline in nearly 5 years.
I buy the McChicken sandwich. It's $3, almost $4.
It's also hitting what traditionally had become the cheaper option. But for many, that's no longer the case.
Okay, so before we get into the fast food industry as the canary in the coal mine for much larger structural economic problems, there is something more important you need to understand. Fast food locations used to be fun. Pizza Huts looked like actual huts. Chuck E. Cheese had rodent-themed decor, and McDonald's was full of bright colors, escaped convicts, and nightmare-inducing clowns. That's clearly changed, and now almost any fast food store you go into is the same generic style of nondescript, boxy modern commercial building. This has happened for a few reasons that are each very revealing about the broader direction the industry has gone. The first reason is that children have become less important to overall business demand. In the good old days, companies would advertise directly to children in the hopes they would effectively become little sales representatives and throw a shit fit until their parents gave in and took them to get some deep-fried slop. Regulations around advertising to children and a general cultural shift away from feeding children too much unhealthy food means that companies can't rely on this market as much anymore though. According to a YouGov survey, Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 are now the largest consumers of fast food, with 42% reporting they consume it several times a week. Demographic shifts means this age group is now less likely to have children of their own, so the extra money and maintenance on custom storefronts isn't worth it since a ball pit is unlikely to appeal to most 20-somethings. No shame though. Shifting consumer trends are one thing, but the bigger reason is that restaurant locations have become far less important and much more interchangeable. According to market data from the consulting firm McKinsey & Company, people are now almost twice as likely to order food through a delivery service like Uber Eats or DoorDash than they are to physically sit in a fast food restaurant and eat their meal. Fast food locations are increasingly just becoming distribution centers for Postmate drivers, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that they have started looking like Amazon warehouses. Anyway, Alongside ingredients and staffing, the real estate these restaurants sit atop is simultaneously the largest expense in most locations, as well as being a significant asset. As the story goes, Ray Kroc, the man responsible for scaling McDonald's into a global fast food empire, figured out that he wasn't in the burger business. He was in the real estate business. To this day, for the majority of fast food locations, most of the money is made by the commercial real estate. The restaurant that sits on the land is basically just a tenant producing cash flows. It doesn't matter if the tenant is a Wendy's or a McDonald's. So stores have become more uniform to lower the cost of construction and the risk of having an unusual building that nobody else wants to rent if a franchise moves out. So if you want to know why fast food restaurants look so boring these days, you can blame real estate speculation, shifting socioeconomics, and middleman technology, something of a recurring theme on this channel. Now anyway, this whole game only works if these businesses still bring in cash, and to do that they need to move some hamburgers. The trouble is, that's getting really hard. Fast food prices have increased significantly beyond inflation. According to data collected from Finance Buzz, the average McDonald's menu item is now twice as expensive as it was 10 years ago. This trend is partially because fast food items used to be artificially cheaper than they should have been. When people would order in-store, there was more opportunity to upsell them to larger meal sizes and tack on higher margin extras like desserts and drinks, so they could make their staple menu items cheaper to attract customers. Now, ingredients and rent has become more expensive, and on top of that, restaurants need to give a significant portion of their top-line revenue to delivery companies. To maintain their margins, they had to raise prices, and their pivot to more premium branding was a way to justify this change without acknowledging that getting food hand-delivered is a luxury with inherent increased costs. Fast food companies aren't allowed to directly offer lower prices in their stores than they do via delivery apps, even though they don't have the additional expenses. So they have had to become sneaky and offer various meal deals so that in-restaurant customers can get better deals if they are willing to navigate through deals via their own apps and pick out in-store meal combinations. If you are a savvy Mick connoisseur and you are willing to sit down, do the math, and make the most of various deals on the company-run fast food apps and in-store offers, you can end up paying half as much for the same food as someone who just turned their brain off and poked at the cheeseburger pictures they wanted on their delivery app of choice. This has made shopping for fast food increasingly confusing and time-consuming, which is exactly the opposite reason why customers go to these companies in the first place. Now, the companies are not exactly blameless victims in this trend. Bloated and confusing menus and premium offerings had the potential to extract the most possible money out of the widest spectrum of customers, from the rich and lazy to the poor and savvy. But now the market has turned against them, and this clever little business model could be their undoing. So it's time to learn how many work to find out if fast food companies have cooked themselves. This week's video is sponsored by Storyblocks. If you've ever had to piece together stock footage clip by clip, you know how fast those costs can add up, and how frustrating it is to track down exactly what you need. Storyblocks takes that stress out of the process by offering unlimited downloads of high-quality stock video, music, sound effects, templates, and more, all for one predictable subscription price. We've used it for everything, from last-minute B-roll to motion graphics to save us hours in post. Having everything in one place just makes our workflow faster and lets us stay focused on the creative. Plus, all of the content is royalty-free with clear-cut licensing, so we never have to worry about copyright claims or surprises later on. If you're a creator looking to level up your production without blowing your budget, Storyblocks is seriously a game changer. To get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head over to storyblocks.com/howmanywords or click the link in the description. So it's not all bad news. As Q1 earnings have been revealed, some brands have actually increased their sales. Taco Bell, which is owned by the conglomerate Yum Brands, increased average store sales by 9% compared to last year. This success has been attributed almost exclusively to the company's Lux boxes, which have become what fast food used to be: a large quantity of food with a lot of calories for not very much money. Even though the industry declined overall, Taco Bell grew because it attracted customers priced out of other options. The company's own CEO boasted on the earnings call that the company's performance was thanks to massive wins with low-income consumers. Yum Brands, which also owns chains like KFC and Pizza Hut, does not invest heavily into real estate like McDonald's, and instead rents most of their locations from third-party commercial landlords. This means that when picking a location to open a store, they don't have to worry about the underlying fundamentals of the area and the real estate market. They can focus exclusively on what locations are going to bring in the most foot traffic. This also lets brands operate in locations that would otherwise be considered undesirable by real estate investors with a side hustle in burgers. Across the rest of the industry, though, fast food as a whole has largely lost ground to people just choosing to cook from home. I know this isn't exactly groundbreaking news to you watching, but food has become kind of expensive. The key demographics of young workers that consume fast food are the same people who are getting laid off first, and statistically have less savings to get them through periods of reduced income. These people also on average have more debt to manage outside of a residential mortgage. By now, you have probably seen the memes about being able to split your burrito purchase into 4 easy installments using Klarna through DoorDash. Now, this has probably been blown out of proportion, as Klarna is just a payment processor that a lot of people are more comfortable with over a credit card or a bank transfer. But it's a humorous way to acknowledge the more serious issue that people are going into debt just to keep up, and new platforms like this are making it easier than ever to do. Klarna and similar services now represent an extra $700 billion worth of consumer debt that isn't being officially recorded, on top of over $1 trillion in credit card debt and student debt, which people now actually need to pay again. So people are short on cash, but these companies are also losing another group of consumers. Fast food has typically been popular with people who just didn't have that much time after working a long shift and then spending an hour or more commuting. But even that has become less of a selling point. Fast food is not that fast anymore. Average wait times have increased significantly, which means unless you are willing to pay the premium to get food delivered, it's almost faster to cook some basic food for yourself. Now, fast food getting slower has happened for 2 reasons. The first is that larger menus make it harder to prepare food in advance and keep it ready to be instantly handed over. Now, this also means that food is prepared to order, which is nice. Apart from the second reason, fast food turnover is higher than it's ever been, and overall staff care is low because people simply do not value these jobs as much as they once did. Now, expecting people to go above and beyond for a minimum wage job at a fast food franchise is clearly a bit dumb, but it's getting harder to find people that want to do the job at all. Once again, fast food companies have kind of been outmaneuvered by the delivery apps. Minimum wage workers now have more options, and delivering food and answering to an algorithm is more attractive to a lot of people than cooking food and answering to the power-tripping shift manager. Of course, the obvious solution is to just pay people more, and some companies are basically being forced to do that. But then they either need to raise their prices even further or cut into already razor-thin margins. These companies are investing a lot of money into automated kitchens to cut down on staff before they get too much negotiating power. But that technology is still in its infancy, and these brands have shareholders to answer to now. If they raise prices anymore, they will also be competing directly with slightly more upmarket fast casual dining, and even local independent restaurants, which are getting harder to differentiate from. Longer wait times and a slightly more expensive menu is expected at these stores. For people who want convenience and are willing to pay a few extra dollars for it, they can just order from these more upmarket restaurants off the apps as well. People who aren't worried about paying a $5 delivery fee and 20% delivery tip also aren't going to think twice about paying a few extra dollars to get chef-prepared food over a barely assembled McChicken. For everybody else, the struggles of the cheapest restaurant is a sign of a pretty bleak financial reality. Most of the CEOs that presented poor earnings for this quarter acknowledged tough economic times for people choosing to eat takeaway less, concluding that cooking from home has become much more popular for people looking to make their money go further. Now, individually, this is a fantastic trend. Unless you are an extremely high-income earner or working an equally extreme schedule, cooking for yourself is one of the best things you can do to improve your health and personal finances. So if you can do it, you probably should do it. But for society at large, when fast food becomes a luxury, that should raise a few alarm bells. Grocery store food has also become much more expensive, and more people than ever now work multiple full-time jobs, so finding the time amongst that schedule to also prepare food is hard. That's also ignoring that according to US Census data, around 9% of households below the federal poverty level don't have an adequately functioning kitchen at all. Yes, a lot of people are choosing to cook from home instead of ordering some Kentucky Fried Carbs, and that's good, but a lot of people are just skipping meals altogether, and that's bad. A survey conducted by Credit Karma found that more than a quarter of respondents admitted to skipping meals because of rising grocery costs. This survey was also conducted on people who are using a credit score tracking service, so the population sample is probably doing better than the true average. Now, this has the potential to cause a feedback loop in low-income communities, because fast food is one of the country's largest employers. Outside of Walmart, Yum Brands and McDonald's are the second and third largest employers of American workers. They may not be the most desirable jobs in the world, but they provide some income to millions of people. If restaurants start closing down, that could quickly become a huge unemployment problem amongst people with the least financial security to begin with. Now, the story is not much better for these companies outside of America either. Most people around the world are struggling with the same financial realities of increased living costs and economic uncertainty. On top of that, America isn't exactly the most popular kid on the block at the moment. Brands like McDonald's, KFC, and Starbucks are struggling with a general anti-American sentiment across most of their markets as people are choosing to support their local chains over the unashamedly American businesses. According to McDonald's own market survey, they found an increase in people in various markets saying they're going to be cutting back on purchases of American brands. Now, companies delivering poor financial news to their shareholders always comes armed with some excuses, but this is clearly a major shift in consumer behavior right when they can least afford it. Now, there is a growing group of consumers that unfortunately fast food isn't particularly good at taking advantage of. Go and watch this video next to find out how some Americans got so good at buying shit. And make sure to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.
It gets crit damage.
Everyone wears shoes, and nearly 25 billion pairs are made every year. But in Hamburg, Germany, one company is trying to completely rethink how we make and who makes them. Zellerfeld 3D print shoes that are custom fit to your feet, fully recyclable and made locally. Their shoes are more than just expensive 3D printed Crocs. They are soft, flexible, breathable, and often wild in design, but genuinely stunning. Their shoes have shown up on celebrities like Justin Bieber, Post Malone or Lewis Hamilton. And even Nike's latest Air Max 1000 are 3D printed by Zellerfeld. But what makes Zellerfeld special isn't just the product, it's the platform. They've built an entire ecosystem that lets anyone from sneakerhead to 3D artist launch their own shoes without spending a fortune on molds and tooling. This isn't just a factory, it's a cultural shift. So let's find out how Zellerfeld tries to bring 3D printed shoes onto every foot of the world and how 3D printed shoes are made. Guten Tag everybody, I'm Stefan and welcome to CNC Kitchen. When I travel to Hamburg, I of course wanted to get my own pair of 3D printed shoes. Normally you get to a shoe store, know your size, let's say a 9, and then try on what fits the best. But Zellerfeld does it differently. Every shoe is printed to order and custom fit using a scan of your feet taken with your phone. And after I did that and selected
Come on, give me crit damage. No. It's not crit damage, and so this is not locked anymore. Bitch. Bitch.
my model, I slipped on my regular shoes, hopped on a train from southern Germany, and after 9 hours and a good night's sleep, I was ready to visit the company that wants to revolutionize a billion-dollar industry, one layer at a time.
Oh. Here we go. Oh. Trainer. Yeah, this, I thought for a moment that it was about my change name, короче. Yes, name card. Let's see. It looks like it looks fine. Yeah, no. Soyuz one is still the best. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. You have so many quests. That have so much fields in them. Shown. Jet and Benben. Some promo codes.
At this point, I'm basically a used car salesman. Let me explain. So about 6 months ago, a couple reached out and they were looking for a circular extendable dining table. So a table that goes from this to this. And I don't know if this makes me a good or a bad custom furniture maker, but I basically got right to work planting seeds so that I could talk them out of their idea and into mine. And it worked. So basically they put their trust in me, which means now the pressure's on. Because if you give a client a disappointing version of their idea, that's one thing. But if you give a client a disappointing version of your idea, that's bad. So I have to deliver with this one. Okay, let's back things up. So this is another Claro walnut slab, which is the same kind that I used on these two projects. I would say arguably the prettiest slabs out there. But when we went on the hunt at GL Veneer, this one was a little harder to find. The clients, Brian and Haley, are looking for something about 60 inches wide. The problem is, most slabs in their budget aren't 60 inches wide, and most slabs 60 inches wide aren't in their budget. Until I found this guy. And I'll admit that in the rough, this one looked a little bit more boring, but we took a gamble on it. So actually seeing what the wood was going to look like took a while, and that's because the rough slab is pretty wavy. In fact, here's 3 hours of flattening played back in 10 seconds. And if watching and hearing that sounds boring, imagine living it. But the good news was, the wood looked amazing, basically identical to the other Claro walnut slabs. Now, at the top of the video, I mentioned how I talked them into a different table than what they wanted when they first emailed me. And it might sound like that was kind of a selfish thing to do, but I was really doing it because I thought it would be something that's better for their space and also a little bit less expensive. So when Braley reached out, initially they wanted a 55-inch circle that could extend to about 86 inches. But there's 3 problems with extending tables. First, they're more expensive. Second, they limit design options. And third, if the top is a slab, there's always going to be concessions. It's either going to look cool when open and goofy when closed, or goofy when open but cool when closed. So we landed on doing a 60-inch circle instead. And then we needed to pick a layout. And my first idea here was something like this where there's 3 exposed live edges. I thought this would have looked really cool, but having kids, they weren't that into it. And they said they preferred more wood and less epoxy. So just filling in the live edges with epoxy wasn't an option either. So if it's more wood and less epoxy that Braley wants, then it's more wood and less epoxy that Braley gets. I guess what Braley doesn't get in the epoxy's case. Anyway, to do that, I'm going to draw a new circle and then cut that part free, getting pretty close but not too close to my chalk line. And you can see here, I've got a pretty small epoxy section left, but For Brayley, I can do better. Basically, I've got this wood boob that's keeping things from really closing up. So we'll do a quick little reduction. There we go. Back's feeling better already. Now, speaking of reductions, going from a table that's a 55-inch circle when closed and an 86 by 55-inch pill shape at its biggest to a table that's a 60-inch circle at all times might sound like a pretty big reduction, but it's really not. First, I know 5 inches might not sound like much, but going from a 55-inch circle to a 60-inch circle is actually a pretty big difference when you think about the area of the top in square inches. Now, I won't bore you with the math, but here's the equation if you want to bore yourself. That said, assuming you don't want to do the math and you also don't want to take my word for it, here's a thought experiment. Imagine your ex-girlfriend with her new boyfriend, who is 5 inches bigger than you. Now, 5 extra inches sounds like a lot. 7 whole inches. Anyway, the important thing is, whether it's the 86 by 55-inch pill table or the 60-inch round table, 8 people is pretty much the max you can fit either way. Also, side note, I don't know if these graphical things that I add in help you to understand what's going on better. So if they do, let me know by clicking the like button on this video, and that will let me know that they're helping. And if they're not, then click the subscribe button, and that's how I'll judge that. So okay, now we got a problem that we need to fix. Basically, I need to start turning this thing into an actual circle. But to do that, I need the 2 chunks to get connected. So what I'm about to do is make a couple of what I call band-aids to stabilize things before I pour epoxy. And the last time that I did this, I got several comments from people saying that I should have used bow ties to do it. And to those people, I say, you're wrong. Well, maybe not wrong, but you're telling me to do extra work for no benefit. No matter what shape I make these, Band-Aid, bow tie, Pac-Mans, whatever, these are a temporary solution. Their only purpose is to hold things in a fixed position until we pour epoxy. And after we've done that, they'll serve no purpose. They'll have become redundant. And they won't be visible except for on the underside. And even if Brayley or whoever is planning to lay on the ground underneath the table every night to look at the underside for some odd reason, a bow tie looking better than a Band-Aid is subjective. I mean, if you're going to winter formal, sure, a bow tie is objectively better. But if you're a background dancer in a Nelly video, then a Band-Aid is better. And actually, now that I think about it, a Pac-Man and Ghosts on the underside would have been pretty boss. Live and learn. All right, now a second ago you saw me squaring up some corners with a chisel, but after doing one, I decided to abandon that and instead cut a little round edge onto my Band-Aids, which I got all set up and then forgot to film. But basically I used this little Craig jig, which comes with a bunch of templates for various radiuses. And then after doing that, I put a small chamfer on the underside so that my glue has somewhere to escape to. And then I glued and banged my Band-Aids into place. And here you can see the difference between chiseling and rounding over the Band-Aid. I think they're equally fine and you won't see them anyway. If you're a regular viewer, then you know that for the past few months I've been working on designing a mechanical pencil, and countless designs and 5 physical prototypes later, it's finally ready. So it's available now for pre-sale. I'll have a link in the description. And if you're interested, you can go there and see some pictures and learn more about it. Here's a quick little preview for anybody who's only mildly curious, I guess. But needless to say, I'm really proud of it, and that's it. No more updates. For now. In woodworking, it's pretty rare that there's ever going to be only one way to get something done. But of all the ways somebody might cut out a circle, I would guess that the way that I'm doing it here isn't the most popular. The most popular is going to be using a circle cutting jig and a router. Something like this.
Many
but rather than
insects have
using
a
one to cut out my
compulsion to
slab,
follow the
I like
light.
to use one to cut out
And
the base
humans
of
are
my
the
form,
same.
and then use that
Except
to
we call
template
that
around my
light
circle.
hope.
And the reason that I prefer this is I think that there's just less that can go wrong. If you're using a jig and something slips, you could accidentally cut inside or outside of whatever shape you're trying to make. And in this case, if you accidentally cut inside, that's not good. And while it would suck to mess up and cut on the inside when you're making the form, it's pretty fixable or even replaceable. But if you do it on your slab, that's a bigger problem. And once you get to the stage where you're template routing, if something goes wrong, it's pretty much always going to happen to the outside of your circle. I mean, I guess you could have something go wrong to the inside, but you'd have to really be trying to mess up. All that said, no matter how you do it, at some point it's really just a lot of routing and a lot of sawdust, but look at that. Finally made it through. Just kidding. I actually had to do one more pass where I cut a chamfer on the underside of the circle, and this is kind of similar to what we did with the band-aids. Basically, I need a little relief spot for the caulking in my form to go. Otherwise, it's going to hold the entire slab up off of the form by about 1/4 of an inch, which would waste a lot of epoxy. And again, I'm not going to bore you with the math, but it's about 3 gallons. And here's the math if you want to bore yourself. Or again, you can just take my word for it. Actually, that just made me think of something kind of interesting. Or maybe depressing, depending on how you think about it. But cutting that chamfer a couple seconds ago will probably be the closest that I ever get in my entire life to being rich. If you think about it like this. So it only took me about 3 minutes to cut that chamfer, which means that I could have done that 20 times in 1 hour. And doing it saved 3 gallons of epoxy, which means that in an hour I could save 60 gallons of epoxy. Well, a 3-gallon kit of epoxy costs about $400, which means technically I was making $8,000 an hour for that brief moment. And that equates to a full-time salary of over $16 million per year. Now, the bad news is I don't think anybody's hiring a full-time caulk relief cutter, but the good news is now this entire slab's only going to use about 1/2 of a gallon of epoxy rather than 3.5 gallons. So yeah, I might not get rich anytime soon, but hopefully I shouldn't go broke either. And speaking of epoxy, here I'm using the same technique that I always do, where I start with a thin layer of the slow hardener, which will cure in a few hours. That way I can make sure I don't have a leak. And then the next day I use the Thickset Fathom, which will cure in a few days. And here comes my complimentary warning to anybody with trypophobia, which is a fear of clusters of small holes.
Humans are the same.
And yes, it's a real thing. The comment section has let me know many times. And for everybody else, here's some satisfying bubble popping. And I guess a test to see if you have trypophobia. Now, speaking of satisfying stuff, the last time I built a circle table, this was easily the most satisfying part of the build for me, which is very cleanly and easily peeling off the plastic garden edging. Actually, it came off so clean last time that the material that I'm using in this video is actually that same material. This time though, not so much. That was until I found a sweet spot, and then it was Satisfaction City. Until it wasn't. Then it was, then it wasn't. Then I hurt my hand. And whatever, it is what it is. But it did have me feeling less than optimistic about the next step, which is removing the base of my form. And if you saw that last circle table, you'll know that it did not go well. But this time, thankfully, unlike the garden edging, Satisfaction City. Alright, so at this point my circle's still oversized by about 1 inch, and I decided that rather than using a circle cutting jig to make it smaller, I'd try cutting it with my CNC. Which, trust me, I managed to screw up a lot. And here I don't really have much room for error. So to make sure that I nail this, I need to find the dead center of the circle. So here's a little trick that you can use if you ever have to do something similar. First, draw any random line across your circle. Then find the center of that line and mark it. And then from that, mark and draw a perpendicular line that goes towards the center of the circle. Now, if you just repeat the same thing once more, wherever those two lines intersect is the center of your circle. That's a theory, at least. And in real life, you're probably not going to have perfect intersections. I didn't. But I just took the average of 3 and called that good. And now it's gut check time. So I fired her up and let her rip. And it worked out really well. Have I ever introduced you guys to my wife, Dolores? Here she is. And we'll come back to her. But for now, let's take a minute to thank this video's sponsor, Foreo, who's a Swedish beauty tech brand. And you're probably thinking, why the hell would a Swedish beauty tech brand want to sponsor one of Chris's videos? I asked myself the same thing. And then it hit me. They probably know that I am a terrible gift giver. True story, when Dolores and I were dating, I bought her car tires as a gift. Practical? Sure, but not exactly heartwarming. So if you're a terrible gift giver like me, pay attention here. I know Mother's Day has come and gone, but there's always birthdays, holidays, or that time you accidentally got a little too chatty with Becky from accounting. And Foreo has our backs with innovative products like the UFO 2, which can turn a 20-minute face mask routine into a 2-minute routine, providing an instantly nourished and healthy glow from the very first use. Dolores even told me it was the most satisfying 2 minutes I've ever given her. Now this thing literally has too many features and benefits to list them all, but to put it simply and in my own words, it's designed with cutting-edge technologies so that it can shrink pores, reduce puffiness, diminish signs of aging, massage and relax face and neck muscles, and best of all, it's an awesome gift that you can give her. And it prevents you from doing something dumb like buying her tires for Hanukkah. Also, never discount that whole shrinking pores thing. Take it from me, women hate large pores. Actually, don't take any woman advice from me. That's a bad idea. But this is a good gift idea. So when it's time to give a gift, check it out. And right now you can get a 21% discount on the UFO 2 and masks using the link in the description. Trust me now and thank me later. Alright, so at this point the slab is really starting to take shape. And if you're wondering what these fine dust spots are, this is the one bad thing that I found about Claro walnut slabs. They have these bug holes in the sapwood areas, and they're kind of a pain to deal with. And that's because every time you cut, you seem to find a new hole to fill. But I suppose you could argue that they give the slabs more character and actually make them prettier. I will say though, for as beautiful as this slab turned out, which you'll see in a little bit, this is one of those rare instances where, in my opinion, the base design is actually going to be the star of the show. And I'm excited to show this one, so let's talk about that for a minute. So when it came to the base design, Braley didn't really have anything specific in mind, which is honestly the way that I like it. I'll admit it always ends up being way more work, but it's also a lot more fun and a chance to get really creative. So to kick things off, I came up with 3 very different designs just so that I could get a better sense of their style. And from doing that, option B was out. In other words, they want some kind of central pedestal table and not legs on the perimeter. So from there I figured I'd give them a couple of riffs on each option. Here's the alternative versions I came up with for option C, and here are the alternatives I came up with for option A. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure how many designs in we are at this point, but even still, I'm not looking for them to pick one of these. I still consider all of these unrefined ideas, and really I'm looking for
Time itself is a silent song. Exactly, but none of them believe.
Not interested. 8 days. 30 days. Test run.
for a definitive direction that they're leaning.
So you've decided to do some crimes. Who hasn't? Well, thanks to those legal myths that TV shows and fake lawyers on Reddit continue to spread, you're probably in for the biggest surprise of your life. So the cops just burst through your door without a warrant, they didn't read you your Miranda rights, and you're probably going to be found guilty on nothing but circumstantial evidence, and you're defending yourself in the courtroom when it happens. Because even if you can't afford it, you are not entitled to an attorney. Because myth number one, if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Yes, that's right, you are not entitled to an attorney. Well, to be more accurate, it very much depends. The founders were really serious about giving people individual rights against police and prosecutors, and that's why the Sixth Amendment says, quote, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. And the Supreme Court recognizes why this is a foundational right. Quote, of all the rights that an accused person has, the right to be represented by counsel is by far the most pervasive, for it affects his ability to assert any other rights he may have. But the baseline right to an appointed attorney comes from the Supreme Court's 1963 decision in Gideon versus Wainwright, and in that case, case, a Florida man named Clarence Earl Gideon was charged with a felony and couldn't afford a lawyer. He asked the court to appoint one, but they said no because Florida only provided lawyers in capital cases. Capital cases are where the defendant, if convicted, could face death. Gideon defended himself, lost, and went to prison. He appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, which unanimously ruled that the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to counsel in all criminal cases, even for those who can't afford to pay. But something got lost in translation because most people think this means you have a right to a free lawyer. Well, sort of. Gideon established a requirement that states must provide attorneys to indigent defendants in felony cases. In a later case, the court clarified that the right to counsel applies to misdemeanor and petty offenses as well, as long as the defendant faces the possibility of incarceration. Now, the Supreme Court probably should have just stopped it right there. Unfortunately, it wasn't done tinkering with the right to counsel. Instead of adopting a simple standard like you get a lawyer if the offense could lead to jail time, the Supreme Court pulled an Avril Lavigne and couldn't help but go and make things complicated. In Scott versus Illinois, the court held that the state does not have to provide a lawyer for a misdemeanor unless imprisonment is actually imposed by the judge. Oh, SCOTUS, why do you have to go and make things so complicated? I see the way you're ruling like some other country gets me frustrated. Now, in our video about America's most unhinged judges, I talked about how a Texas judge abused this very principle by coercing defendants into marriage in cases where jail was a possibility but not a certainty. Now, none of the people the judge pressured into marriage were represented by counsel, even though their charged offenses could have led to jail time. And that was a legal catch-22. You only get a lawyer if you're going to jail, but by the time you know that, you've already gone through your hearing without one. And as usual with constitutional rights, terms and conditions apply. The fine print says that even when you do qualify for a court-appointed lawyer, the process isn't automatic. You have to apply for it, disclose your financials, and wait for the court to assign someone. And about those financials, while the lawyer truly is free for those who qualify, not many people qualify. Who qualifies as too poor to afford an attorney varies from state to state and sometimes from county to county. Many states use a multiple of the federal poverty guidelines to determine indigency, and so in 2025, the federal poverty guideline for a single person was $15,650. And many states set their number at 125% of that guideline, which means the person would have to earn less than $18,825 to get a free lawyer in those states. So yes, you have a right to counsel, but it's not a universal safety net. It's more like a conditional offer. If you're facing jail, if you're poor enough, and if the court says so, congrats, you get a lawyer. Else you better hope that the cops forget to read you your Miranda rights, because then you walk free. No arrest, no charges, just a smug smile as you strut out of the interrogation room, right?
Confining themselves to
Myth number 2, police failed to read me my rights, case dismissed. Nope, that is wrong. But that hasn't stopped pop culture from spreading this myth. It's going to come as a shock, but real life is not a Medea movie.
You forgot to Mirandize her?
That old woman got the strength of any man.
I've got to let you go.
Now, the Miranda warning, which starts with you have the right to remain silent, comes from the 1966 Supreme Court case of Miranda versus Arizona. Before the police can interrogate someone who is in custody, they must inform them of their Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights, the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. If they don't, any statements made during the interrogation can be thrown out under the exclusionary rule, which is the legal doctrine that bars illegally obtained evidence from trial. But Miranda only protects your words, not your actions. So if the cops find a kilo of meth in your trunk, no amount of unread rights is going to make that disappear. On top of that, according to the Supreme Court, Miranda only kicks in when there is a custodial interrogation. If a suspect voluntarily comes to the police station and talks, that doesn't mean he or she is in custody. The takeaway? Miranda applies when a reasonable person would feel they are not free to leave. If the police arrest you for that kilo of meth in your trunk, but don't ask any questions, no warning needed. If they ask you questions before you're arrested and you answer voluntarily, still no Miranda required. That's why failure to read Miranda rights isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. So the next time a TV lawyer says they didn't read you your rights so the case gets thrown in the bin, know this: the only thing that's going in the bin is that script's grade for legal accuracy. Now, if your plan to avoid all this legal trouble is to just lay low at home where police can't get to you without a warrant, well, I've got some more bad news for you. Myth number 3, police can't enter your home without a warrant. Now, it's a staple of legal dramas and TikTok and Know Your Rights videos. Police need a warrant to enter your house.
This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed.
Now, to be fair to Jesse Pinkman, this myth is based on a real rule. The Fourth Amendment does protect your home from unreasonable searches and seizures. Generally, the police need a warrant to enter your residence, but there are so many exceptions to the warrant rule that they almost swallow the whole Fourth Amendment. If you've ever lived in LA and participated in our city's national pastime, watching car chases on live TV, you know just how common it is for suspects on the run to drive home like they're sliding into home base yelling safe.
Oh no, oh no.
But that's not how any of this works. Here's how it really works. A warrantless entry is usually considered unconstitutional unless it falls into a recognized exception like consent, hot pursuit, plain view, search incident to arrest, stop and frisk, special needs/administrative searches, and the automobile exception. But the biggest exception to the warrant requirement is exigent circumstances. Under that doctrine, police can enter a dwelling without a warrant if there's an emergency, like someone is in danger, a suspect is about to flee, or evidence is about to be destroyed. Now that seems straightforward enough, but it's not. Imagine this: the police are chasing a suspect through an apartment complex. They lose track of him but smell marijuana coming from one of the units. They knock, loudly announce themselves as police, and then hear movement inside. The police officers think they hear people scrambling and a toilet flushing. Convinced evidence is being destroyed, the officers kick in the door and find drugs. But here's the twist: the suspect they were chasing wasn't even inside because the cops entered the wrong apartment. Now that happened in a real case called Kentucky versus King. The defendant in that apartment argued the police shouldn't have been allowed to enter without a warrant because the police themselves created the emergency by knocking and announcing their presence. But the Supreme Court sided with the police. As long as officers act lawfully by knocking and announcing, they're not barred from entering if they hear sounds suggesting evidence is being destroyed, even if the suspect isn't inside. And if the people inside react in a way that makes officers reasonably believe evidence is being destroyed, the cops can enter without a warrant. And there's an iconic scene at the end of Goodfellas where Karen Hill, panicked and desperate, races to the bathroom and flushes a stash of cocaine down the toilet just as the FBI closes in. And this is a textbook example of why the exigent circumstances exception exists. If the police had waited outside to get a warrant, the evidence would be long gone. And the law allows for that kind of split-second judgment. So while the Fourth Amendment does offer strong protections for your home, the phrase "you need a warrant" isn't a magic shield. If the police smell drugs, hear flushing toilets, or think someone's in danger, they might not need one. Now, if you believe any of these legal myths, you'll probably want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, let my law firm, the Eagle Team, help. If you've got in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got a data breach letter saying your information might have been leaked, or dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number on screen for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team. So okay, you're busted. At least this is America, where our Constitution explicitly states that everyone is entitled to their day in court. Ah, such a comforting thought. I think you know where this is going. Myth number 4, everyone is entitled to their day in court. Now in America, we do things by the book. Now that means that if someone has wronged you, or you were wrongfully accused, you get your chance to face off to prove your truth. It sounds like a constitutional promise. And yes, the Constitution does talk about trials. Article 3, Section 2 says, a trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury. The Sixth Amendment guarantees that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. In 1968, the Supreme Court established that the right to a jury trial is a fundamental right applicable to the states through the 14th Amendment. That's all true. But here's why people believe that everyone is entitled to their day in court. The right to a trial is not absolute. In criminal court, the right to a jury trial only kicks in if the offense is considered serious. In Baldwin versus New York, the Supreme Court ruled that crimes punishable by more than 6 months in jail are serious enough to require a jury trial. But for petty offenses with lighter penalties, you might face a judge, not a jury. And even when trial is possible, over 90% of criminal cases end in plea deals, not courtroom battles. So you may be entitled to a trial in theory, but in practice, most people never have one. And in civil cases, you're not automatically guaranteed a full-blown trial at all. Most lawsuits never make it that far. They get dismissed, settled, or decided through motions like summary judgment, where the judge rules there's no need for a trial because the law clearly favors one side. And of course, we've all seen Harvey Specter settle $1 billion lawsuit over bourbon and banter in the span of a single afternoon. But in real life, civil cases often drag on for years, and that's because in civil cases, there's no such thing as a right to a speedy trial. Although that also depends state by state. But there are also legal doctrines that make it hard for litigants to ever get their day in court. A major example is qualified immunity, a doctrine often invoked by police and government officials in civil rights cases. It shields them from liability unless the plaintiff can show that the official violated clearly established law. Defendants can appeal a denial of qualified immunity before trial, triggering years of appellate delay, while various courts try to determine whether a person has the right to sue the officers. So while you're technically suing, you might be stuck in legal limbo without ever setting foot in a courtroom. In Hollywood, justice is always served in 42 minutes plus commercials. But in the real world, your day in court may be hundreds of days waiting for the court to decide whether you're even allowed to ask for one. Which is why it's usually best to avoid trial in the first place, which you can do with this one neat trick. Just declare yourself a sovereign citizen. Myth number 5, the sovereign citizen loophole. Now, some Americans believe the government has no power over them because they're sovereign citizens, independent, self-governing individuals immune to the laws that apply to the rest of us. They've got a laundry list of legal theories to back this up, including the belief that they don't have to pay taxes and that the U.S. legal system has no jurisdiction over them. And you've probably seen some sweet, sweet justice shatter their delusions.
I'll step out of the vehicle for $500.
Step.
You can search me for $500 cash. I'll get in the car for $500.
But what you might not know about this stupid movement is that it's based on a legal theory inspired by a printer's error. The sovereign citizen idea originated with a group founded by Christian minister William Gale in the 1970s. His group, Posse Comitatus, believed that there was no higher authority than the county sheriff. It began as a group peddling your everyday stock racism and anti-Semitism, but when they started talking about the evils of taxation, the movement really took off. Which brings me to the printer's error that animates their legal theory. Sovereign citizens are 13thers, people who believe there is a secret 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, in the real world, the actual 13th Amendment, the one ratified by the states, abolished slavery. But 13thers think that an older amendment which failed to pass is actually the law of the land. The Titles of Nobility Amendment was a proposed amendment to the Constitution that would have stripped United States citizenship from any citizen who accepted a title of nobility from an emperor, king, prince, or foreign power. Congress passed it in 1812 during the panic about Napoleon's brother marrying an American citizen. You know, what happened if their son tried to become king of America? And freaking out about Napoleon's American nephew is like worrying about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's daughter one day becoming queen of America. And Americans eventually figured that out, but a majority of the states never ratified the Nobility Amendment, and it's not part of the Constitution. Do you hear me, 13thers? It's not a real amendment. However, in 1815, a Philadelphia printing house made the mistake of including the unratified amendment in its volumes. The error was not fixed until 1845. So for 30 years, untold volumes of text went out in the world representing that the 13th Amendment had passed ratification. But when the real 13th Amendment passed ratification and abolished slavery, the consequences were seismic enough to clear up any confusion about the typo. But that didn't stop conspiracy theorist David Dodge in the early 1980s from finding himself a copy of the Constitution with this error and having a big eureka but stupid moment. He concocted an elaborate conspiracy that this secret 13th Amendment actually invalidates the entire U.S. justice system. Why? Because lawyers and judges have titles. Lawyers use the title Esquire, and judges are known as the Honorable, or, Your Honor. So sovereign citizens think that lawyers and judges, through licensure, accept titles and therefore are no longer American citizens. Now, all of this, of course, has been thoroughly rejected by the courts. So sadly, I can't force anyone to call me Sir Devon Stone, defender of the sovereign laws, or legal eagle, baron of the bench, and titles of nobility are already banned by the Constitution. See Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8. So America doesn't have an official aristocracy. When a lawyer dies, their children don't inherit the law license. And lawyers are still U.S. citizens, at least for now. But it doesn't matter how many times the courts slap this theory down, people just won't give up on it. And sovereign citizen lore is beloved by jailhouse lawyers, inmates who know just enough law to file long-winded legal briefs arguing that the courts do not have any jurisdiction over their cases. And you can probably excuse people with no legal training who barely have access to a law library from falling into the sovereign citizen trap. But this bogus legal theory has also been championed by people who should know better, like the Iowa Republican Party. Iowa Republicans put the missing 13th Amendment into their 2010 party platform, and they tried to argue that President Obama forfeited his citizenship by accepting an award from the Nobel Prize Committee, which was apparently a foreign state. And although this is funny in the abstract, conspiracy theories can have some serious consequences. Over the years, the movement has fanned out from its anti-Semitic and racist origins. The sovereign citizen movement now attracts people of every race, religion, and political persuasion. Unfortunately, I mean, we're all for diversity and equality, but maybe not about something that's incredibly stupid. But sovereign citizens have been known to file notices of liens against property for the purpose of harassing the true owner. And this tactic, which has been called paper terrorism, clouds title to real estate and other property. People espousing sovereign citizen theory produce fake arrest warrants, forge fake notes, and even issue their own currency, which, I shouldn't have to tell you this, are very much crimes. But let's say that doesn't stop you from picking up some criminal charges. You finally get your day in court, and you're feeling optimistic that the jury's gonna find you not guilty for all the wacky sovereign citizen crime you definitely did not do, you rascal, because all the state's evidence is circumstantial. Myth number 6, all the evidence is circumstantial, they'll never convict me. You've heard it in courtroom dramas, shouted by defendants who think they've found a loophole. You can't convict me, all the evidence is just merely circumstantial. Even Law and Order is guilty of this one.
There's circumstantial evidence and a statement from his son. Now this won't do at all.
And the idea is that if there's no smoking gun, no eyewitnesses, and no confession, then the prosecution doesn't have a case. But here's the truth. Circumstantial evidence is not only admissible, it's often just as strong and sometimes stronger than what we call direct evidence. But let's define some terms here. Direct evidence is evidence that directly proves a key fact at issue without needing any inferences. So an example is an eyewitness saw the crime, a video, or the weapon used in the crime. And circumstantial evidence is evidence that requires an inference to connect it to a conclusion. Examples include forensic evidence such as fingerprints and bloodstains, or documentary evidence like business records or text messages. If a witness testifies that they saw you stab someone, that's direct evidence. But if they say they saw you leave the victim's house at midnight covered in blood and then watched you toss a knife into a storm drain, well, that's circumstantial. But that seems pretty strong, and a jury can convict you on that evidence alone. And that's why juries are routinely instructed that the law makes no distinction between the weight or value to be given to either direct or circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is not a lesser form of proof, it's just a different kind. As the Supreme Court has long recognized, circumstantial evidence is not only sufficient, but also may be more certain, satisfying, and persuasive than direct evidence. And in fact, most juries believe that DNA evidence is the gold standard for determining whether someone is guilty. But DNA evidence is generally considered circumstantial. It does not directly prove a crime was committed, but it can be used to infer a connection between a person and the crime scene or an object. So circumstantial evidence isn't lesser evidence. Pop culture gets that wrong a lot. But lawyers can definitely attack the inferences drawn from the circumstantial evidence. And when it comes to destroying circumstantial evidence, no movie has ever been more accurate than My Cousin Vinny.
What is this rusty, dusty, dirty-looking thing over your window?
It's a screen.
A screen. It's a screen.
He is walking the witness down a logical path that he's not going to be able to get out of, which is that there's a lot of stuff between his vantage point and the events that he is an eyewitness to. And the eponymous Vinny doesn't argue that the evidence is invalid because it's circumstantial, he just shows that it leads to the wrong conclusion. Now, My Cousin Vinny's mastery of circumstantial evidence is a big reason why I called it the perfect legal movie, and that's because of its screenwriter, Dale Launer. And if you love the movie like I do, you can check out the extended cut of my interview with the screenwriter on today's sponsor, Nebula, where we really get into the legal nuances of this masterpiece of courtroom drama. And for limited time, you can get a lifetime membership for Nebula. You can buy once and then never again. It's the greatest steal of all. Now, we've really been active on Nebula this year with tons of Nebula exclusive videos, like our analysis of how RFK Jr. can legally or not legally ban vaccines, or our video on unhinged judges that went too far. It's also the only place to watch my feature-length documentary, Bad Law Words Good, and a bunch of videos about lawsuits and topics that are way too not safe for work for YouTube. Because on Nebula you can watch all of our videos ad-free and early, because our videos always go up on Nebula first. And you can check out tons of original videos from your favorite creators like Johnny Harris, Neo, Jetlag, Real Engineering, Real Life Lore, and hundreds more. And in particular, you can watch the Nebula original series called Modern Conflicts by Real Life Lore, which just dropped a gripping documentary about the manhunt for El Chapo. I highly recommend checking that out. Because what's truly special about Nebula is a creator-owned platform built by me and other YouTubers and podcasters. And because it's a subscription service, we get to work on larger, higher budget productions than we could anywhere else. It's becoming the go-to place where creators can make content their audiences love, free from the constraints of the algorithm or unwanted outside pressure. And for those of you that want to share everything Nebula has to offer with your friends and family, Nebula is now offering an annual gift card. If you sign up using my link that's on screen right now, you can give a year of Nebula to a friend for 40% off the yearly subscription, a year of the best content for just $36. And that's a gift that you can give to yourself, by the way, because you deserve it. Or you can check out the lifetime subscription, where for $300, you can get access to Nebula forever. We're investing in even more big concept, high-octane Nebula originals, and your lifetime subscription goes towards that investment. In a way, Lifetime is the best possible deal of all. Either way, you'll get all my videos early, get access to exclusives, and support the ambitious projects that my friends and I are working on our own streaming site. So sign up now and get you or a friend 40% off the incredible Lifetime deal by clicking on the link below. After that, click on this link over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.
Huh? Everybody stand! Suffer the wrath of Eastly! Pyroclastic surge!
Babylon. Okay, let's first deal with lower dragons. And let's deal with them like... Oh, that's gonna be completely useless. Ah, yes. Obviously. Like that, and what I think I should use is her. Just a bit of crit rate. Good amount of everything else. 84% crit rate. 180 crit damage. Alright, that's fine. Though obviously that would be even better. Yeah. I have already 50% crit rate. So like 30% crit rate from those, right? 6.2 7 3.5 9.7. Like that, maybe. So like the only electric character is Fischl. Circle impact seems nice. Alright, let's see how... Oh, come on. It's completely useless. I'll try this one.
Your journey ends here, Lord of Sand. Your sacrifice is...
A little elusive! Strike a pose! Let my name echo and get to work! You two! Tight!
Let the mighty be humbled! Settle down!
A gift for you. Having fun? A grand... A dash of frosting! The pinnacle back... The audacity! Yoo-hoo! Let the world collide! Show no mercy! Eat Laline! Eat Papa!
Silence! The tides beckon. Settle down!
Let my magic begin! Show no fear! Goose on the loose! Shower me with praise! Let my name echo and fulfill our path! Suffer the wrath of... Laid bare. You asked for it! Let's light it up! I'm going in!
me.
Drop your weapons! Hands where I can... Yeah! Everybody stand back! Let's light it up! Overruled! I summon final warning! You asked for it! Let's light it up! Teamwork is... Transfix! Shadow Raven! Justice will prevail! I'm going in! Let's light it up! Oz, reveal thyself! Drop your weapons! Teamwork is dreamwork!
Your journey ends here, Lord of Sand. Your
Time to
sacrifice is
shine!
ready.
A little amuse-bouche! A burst of... Show no mercy! Laline! East Papa! Get...
Silence! Let the mighty be humble.
Having fun? A gift for you. Enjoy. Off to the freezer! Goose on the loose! Strike a pose! Let the world come alive! Fulfill our pact! You two! Time!
Settle down. Be sanctified.
How have you considered me? Shame. A little amuse...
There we go.
Laid bare. By royal decree, final warning. You asked for it. I'm going in. Yeah. Off we go. Witness my rise. Oz, reveal the... Justice will prevail! Adventure! Teamwork is dreamwork! Overruled! Wings of darkness! Come! Let's light it up! You asked for it!
No rest for the...
Let's light it up! Everybody stick... Transfixed! I summon! Stop right there! Justice will prevail! I'm going in! Yeah, let's light it up! By royal decree! Laid bare. Final warning! You asked for it! Teamwork is dreamwork!
Well, maybe I should use Ayaka here instead. Maybe I should use Mavuika here instead. I'm not sure. She does, however, have wrong weapon currently.
Benny's adventure team, assemble!
For that. And I haven't actually crafted it. And I have no clue how much. Well, I guess I'm gonna craft the Claymore, considering
No wonder you're a master.
Exploration and trials. Adventuring is right up my alley.
Hard work is all there is.
Yeah, 41 pulls. I need twice that amount for at least one pull. Otherwise it's gonna be on, oh, I mean.
O.J. Simpson is dead. At least now he can rest knowing that his wife's killer has been brought to justice. That was hands down the best Norm Macdonald impression on social media, but here's the legal question. Will the estate of O.J.'s victims finally be able to get compensation? When Simpson went on trial for murdering his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman, it was called the trial of the century. Simpson had a prior record of domestic violence toward Nicole, and she told friends and family that he was going to kill her. Brown and Goldman were brutally stabbed to death outside of Nicole's home in Brentwood. And after a polarizing 18-month trial, a jury acquitted O.J. Simpson of all charges on October 3rd, 1995. Now today, the mainstream legal view is that the jury got it wrong. And a little over a year later, Ron Goldman's father, Fred, brought a civil action for wrongful death against Simpson. And in 1997, a jury found Simpson personally liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman in a civil court and ordered O.J. to pay $33.5 million in compensatory and punitive damages to the victims' families. Simpson then spent 30 years trying to avoid paying the victims' families, in part by settling in Florida, where state laws offered him a unique protection from judgment collection. But then O.J. Simpson wrote a book called If I Did It, a ghoulish first-person hypothetical account of Brown and Goldman's murder. Here he is explaining what definitely happened.
I just remember Nicole fell and hurt herself, and this guy kind of got into a karate thing, and I said, well, you think you can kick my ass? And I remember I grabbed a knife. I do remember that portion, taking a knife from Charlie, and to be honest,
Many
after that, I
insects
don't
have a
remember.
compulsion to
Except
follow the
I'm
light.
standing there and there's all kind
Humans are
of
the same,
stuff around,
except
and
we call that light.
What kind of stuff?
Blood and stuff around.
But Simpson has been trying to avoid the judgments ever since. But now that he's dead, can the victims finally recover? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, if you're not old enough to remember the world before smartphones, you probably have no idea who O.J. Simpson is. So for all of my Gen Z subscribers, here's a brief history lesson. Now, Orenthal James Simpson, more commonly known as O.J. or the Juice, is regarded as one of the most talented running backs in American football history, and one of the least terrible people to come out of USC. Go Bruins. Now, after 9 seasons with the Buffalo Bills and 2 more with the San Francisco 49ers, Simpson retired from football in 1979 and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1985. After football, Simpson pursued a career in sports commentary and acting. Simpson's most famous acting role was the dim-witted Detective Nordberg from the Naked Gun trilogy.
Nordberg, that's wonderful.
Whoa! Oh, Frank, everyone should have a friend like you.
Simpson was also a spokesman for a variety of companies, most prominently Hertz Rental Cars, where the ex-running back could be seen leaping over luggage and other obstacles to catch a flight, which was still better than the Tom Brady Love Hertz commercial that no one can escape from.
Sometimes I just want to rent a car and go.
And if you didn't follow Simpson's career before his fall from grace, it might be difficult to understand just how unthinkable it was to picture him as a murderer. But according to a 2019 interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Simpson was the producer's first choice to play the eponymous Terminator in the Terminator movies, but director James Cameron nixed the idea because he felt O.J. wasn't believable as a killing machine. But one person who believed that O.J. was capable of killing was his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson. During their 7-year marriage, the LAPD visited the Simpson home 8 times in response to domestic abuse calls. On the morning of January 1st, 1989, a bloody and bruised Nicole sprinted toward responding officers screaming, "He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me." After officers told O.J. that he would be taken into custody, they let him go back into his home to get dressed, where he proceeded to jump into his Bentley and flee the scene and temporarily avoid arrest. And Simpson would later plead no contest to spousal abuse. But while prosecutors recommended jail time and group counseling, the presiding judge gave Simpson a sweetheart deal. He was placed on 2 years probation, ordered to perform 120 hours of community service, which he never completed, and was allowed to do counseling on the phone. Simpson was never fingerprinted, which means no police record. In 1992, Nicole Brown Simpson filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. 2 years later, Nicole was found brutally stabbed to death with her friend Ron Goldman, and a warrant was issued for the arrest of her ex-husband O.J. Simpson. Simpson. Now, the O.J. Simpson case triggered a media firestorm that was illustrated by the infamous white Bronco chase. Despite previously agreeing to turn himself in, Simpson, carrying a passport, a disguise, and almost $9,000 in cash, escaped in his white Ford Bronco driven by his friend A.C. Cowlings.
Earlier today, Robert Shapiro had arranged for O.J. to turn himself in. Doctors were in attendance. They were all going to go together in a car because they were worried about suicide. When they went downstairs from a conference room at O.J.'s house, he was gone.
When Simpson pointed a gun at his own head, Cowlings led the LAPD on a low-speed pursuit across L.A. as the entire nation watched live. After Simpson surrendered, he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. In a trial to secure a criminal conviction, the prosecution had to prove O.J. Simpson was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But Simpson had assembled the famous dream team of lawyers who defended him, including legal powerhouses like Robert Shapiro, Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, Robert Kardashian, and Alan Dershowitz. And Team Simpson exploited every possible opportunity to argue to the jury that there was reasonable doubt about their client's guilt. Famously, attacking the credibility of the LAPD was central to the Simpson defense strategy. The defense portrayed them as racially biased, sloppy with evidence, and out to get OJ. And in particular, the defense focused its ire on Mark Furman, the LAPD detective who found the infamous bloody glove on Simpson's property. During trial, Furman denied under oath that he ever used the N-word in the previous 10 years. And to prove that Furman was lying, the defense introduced a series of privately recorded interviews with the screenwriter where the officer repeatedly used the N-word to refer to black suspects and made many references implying that planting evidence in police brutality against African Americans were common practices in the LAPD. And you might recall that in the 90s, things were extremely charged when it came to the LAPD in LA. The LAPD had been criticized for its chummy relationship with celebrities like Simpson, but the department also faced many credible allegations of racial bias in its treatment of black suspects. In 1992, the LAPD was caught on camera viciously beating Rodney King after he had briefly fled a traffic stop. And though 4 officers were charged with assault and excessive force, a jury did not convict them of any crimes. And when the officers were acquitted, it triggered the LA riots, one of the most destructive U.S. civil disturbances in the 20th century. So with Rodney King fresh in the juror's mind, the Furman tapes reinforced the LAPD's problems with racial bias. A year later, Furman pleaded no contest to perjury for lying about his use of racial slurs on the stand, and Furman is now a forensic and crime scene expert for Fox News. And in perhaps the most memorable moment of the trial, Simpson tries on the gloves he's accused of wearing during the murder. Simpson appears to struggle, grimacing and stating "too tight" loud enough for the jury to hear. This was despite the fact that he was taking the Fifth and refusing to testify at trial. Now, his lawyer, Johnny Cochran, would cite this incident repeatedly during closing arguments with an infamous rhyming refrain.
If it doesn't fit,
Let my name echo in song.
And following 11 months of trial and less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Simpson not guilty on all counts on October 3rd, 1995.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information.
And as Ron Goldman's father, Fred, left the courtroom, he turned toward Simpson and muttered one word: murder. At a post-verdict news conference, Fred Goldman, surrounded by family and the defeated prosecution, tearfully expressed his heartbreak at O.J.'s acquittal.
last June 13th, 94.
Whirling snow. Sakura swirl.
Was the
Gotcha.
worst nightmare of my life.
From Silva. Yoo-hoo! Time to shine. A little moose boost.
This is the stuff.
Pinnacle of excellence.
Now, the state's evidence heading into trial seemed overwhelming. Simpson's blood was found at the murder scene. Blood, hair, and fibers from Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman were found in Simpson's car and at his home. A single bloody glove was found at the scene, while a second matching glove was found at O.J. Simpson's estate. And bloody shoe prints found at the scene matched those shoes owned by Simpson. So how could the prosecution lose? Well, for starters, the use of DNA evidence in murder trials was relatively new at the time, and the jury might not have fully grasped just how conclusive such evidence can be and invariably how hard it can be to fake. Others have suggested, credibly, that Simpson benefited from jury nullification to protest decades of LAPD malfeasance, especially in the shadow of Rodney King. And critics have blamed the prosecution for sloppy and unforced strategic errors, like not using available peremptory challenges to keep an ex-Black Panther from the jury. And in addition, allowing Simpson to try on the glove amid concerns that it had shrunk after being soaked in blood was also a potential huge misstep that allowed OJ to seize the narrative of the trial. And to this day, the Brown and Goldman families continue to believe that O.J. Simpson got away with murder, as do pretty much everyone else. Now, obviously, if you commit double murder, you're going to want a good lawyer, but Johnny Cochran has passed away. So if you want a great lawyer, my firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If there was an injury or death in the family, whether O.J. did it or not, if you've gotten in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you've gotten one of those data breach letters that says your information might have been leaked, or dealing with workers' comp or Social Security, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. Because it's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you can get the best representation and find out what your options are. So just click on the link in the description or call the number that's on screen for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team. So click on the link below. So following Simpson's acquittal, the victim's family sued him in civil court for wrongful death. And after a 4-month trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously adjudged Simpson to be liable, meaning legally responsible. And prior to reaching the verdict, the jury asked the court reporter to read back hours of testimony relating to Simpson's alibi, his New Year's 1989 arrest for spousal abuse against Nicole, and the timeline for Simpson's limo driver who took him to the airport the night of the killings. So the jury awarded the victims' families $33.5 million in damages, $8.5 million in compensatory damages to the Goldmans, and $12.5 million in punitive damages each to the Goldman and Brown families. Now you might be wondering how one jury could find O.J. liable for the exact same conduct, which another jury acquitted him of. Well, the Fifth Amendment's prohibition against double jeopardy prevents prosecutors from retrying a person for the same crime twice. But double jeopardy does not foreclose a civil suit on the same subject. And as explained by the Washington Post at the time, the standard for proving civil liability is much lower than criminal guilt. Well, in contrast to the criminal trial where jurors had to reach a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt, the civil jurors faced a much lower burden of proof. They only had to conclude whether Simpson was responsible for the deaths based on a preponderance of the evidence, which lawyers for the plaintiff stressed meant that Simpson probably was the killer. And in the civil trial, Simpson had to testify because he couldn't raise his Fifth Amendment privilege. He could still choose not to testify, but the jury could take adverse inferences against that refusal. And the deposition proved to be explosive. Here's Goldman's lawyer, Daniel Petrocelli, asking Simpson why blood from Brown and Goldman was found in his Ford Bronco and on his socks.
You know why the blood on the console of the Bronco is consistent with the mixture of Ron Goldman's and Nicole's blood? You know why the blood on the socks in your bedroom matched Nicole's blood? No.
At one point, Simpson admits to wrestling Nicole and then admitted he abused her.
You ever hurt her?
Yes.
You ever physically hurt her?
Yes.
You ever bruise her?
Yes.
You ever make her black and blue?
I think any marks that's on her, I take full responsibility for. I don't know what else you want me to do. I take total responsibility.
Why?
For it. Because I shouldn't have handled the situation the way I did.
And another factor that helped the civil case was the admission of evidence that had not been used in the criminal case, including photographs proving Simpson lied when he denied ever owning the brand of shoes that had left bloody footprints at the scene. In the criminal case, jurors never learned that a men's size 12 Bruno Magli brand shoe print stamped in the victim's blood was discovered at the crime scene. However, in the civil case, the lawyers showed the jury 30 photographs of Simpson wearing those shoes. Only 299 pairs of these shoes were ever sold in the United States. And in his deposition, Simpson said,
Did you ever buy shoes that you knew were Bruno Magli shoes?
No, because I know if Bruno Magli makes shoes that look like the shoes they had in court that's involved in this case, I would have never worn those ugly ass shoes.
But then you can see his reaction when he's confronted with photographs.
And that is a picture of you looking at Exhibit 1, correct?
Yes.
And after hearing all the evidence, including over 100 witnesses and more than 2,500 exhibits, the jury found that there was a preponderance of the evidence that Simpson was responsible for the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And following the verdict, Fred Goldman proclaimed to the crowd outside of the courthouse, "We finally have justice for Ron and Nicole." But while this award seemed like a step towards justice, O.J. Simpson had a trick up his sleeve. After being found liable for millions of dollars, O.J. did what many others facing legal difficulties had done. Florida. That's because Florida provides a unique legal protection for anyone trying to avoid paying their debts, making it, in the words of the Tampa Tribune, a deadbeat paradise. Here's how. Every state has some form of homestead exemption, which shields a certain amount of equity in one's home from being seized from creditors through forced sale. For example, California's current homestead exemption provides a maximum of $600,000 of protection, adjusted yearly for inflation. But Florida's homestead exemption is particularly favorable to wealthy debtors like O.J. The state of Florida prohibits creditors to force an individual to sell its homestead in order to pay back a debt, including their heirs. Unlike other states, Florida's exemption from forced sale provides an even greater protection by not limiting the value of certain real property that can be protected from creditors. Had Simpson stayed in California, the victims' families could have forced him to sell assets to pay his judgment. But as a Florida resident, Simpson could put all of his money into his homestead and place his assets beyond the reach of creditors. Simpson also availed himself himself of the protections of federal law, under the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, creditors cannot satisfy a debt through pension funds. And because of ERISA, Simpson had millions of dollars invested in a personal pension and got paid thousands of dollars from his NFL pension that creditors couldn't touch. And Florida law also prevented Goldman from seizing Simpson's NFL pension. And as a result of these legal hurdles, the victims' families had to find creative ways to get any money from Simpson. So his Heisman Trophy was auctioned off for $500,000, but most of that money was used to pay expenses associated with the civil litigation. Now, after his high-profile criminal and civil trials, O.J.'s reputation never fully recovered, for obvious reasons. But rather than retreat from the public eye, Simpson tried to stay relevant in increasingly bizarre ways. Like starring in his own prank show, Juiced, where he famously tried to sell a white Bronco to an unsuspecting person.
You've been juiced.
At a certain point, Simpson gave up on rehabilitating his image and decided to cash in on his newfound maybe-under murder mystique. So in November 2006, Reagan Books, an imprint of HarperCollins, announced it was publishing a book by Simpson entitled If I Did It, wherein O.J. provides a hypothetical description of the murders of Ron Goldman and Bo Brown. And at the time, Fox was affiliated with HarperCollins via News Corp, and it planned to air a 2-day book promotion interview between journalists Judith Reagan and Simpson entitled O.J. Simpson, If I Did It, Here's How It Happened. When the book and TV specials were announced, it sounded like a bad joke. And in fact, the Chris Rock Show had predicted O.J. would one day try to make money by describing hypothetically how he would have committed the murders.
Hey! Who can forget the night O.J. came by to sell his new instructional videotape? I didn't kill my wife, but if I did, here's how I do it.
But Simpson, who reportedly received an advance of $680,000 for If I Did It, described the book as blood money that he reluctantly took part in to pay his bills. He denied that the book was a confession and said that the hypothetical murder scenarios were written by a ghostwriter. And not surprisingly, after intense backlash, both the book and the TV special were canceled and Judith Reagan was fired. And despite the Goldmans' prior opposition to the book, they decided that they could use O.J.'s ghoulish blood money book against him. And in July 2007, the federal bankruptcy judge awarded the Goldman family the publishing rights to If I Did It. The Brown family had opposed publication, stating that it would do nothing to bring the book back and urged people to boycott the book. But the Goldmans defended their decision to publish, with Fred describing the book as tantamount to Simpson's confession.
Come on, what the fuck? He is doing a interview and a book to tell the world how he's decided, as far as I'm concerned, how he's decided he could have done it differently so that maybe he wouldn't be caught.
Incinerate!
And he's going to tell the world how he would have murdered his children's mother and my son in a book and on national TV.
Well, Ron's sister Kim said that it was a rare victory against Simpson. Though once the Goldmans had the publishing rights, they made a few notable changes to maximize the hurt against O.J. For starters, the title was changed to If I Did It, Confessions of a Killer, and included additional commentary from the Goldman family entitled He Did It. And to further needle Simpson, the word if on the cover is hidden in small gray print within the letter I, making the book appear to read, I Did It, Confessions of a Killer. But generally speaking, the families have had an extremely hard time financially recovering from O.J. Simpson. Back in 2014, Ron Goldman's mother put the unpaid judgment up for auction, but apparently had no takers. And according to a 2021 court filing, Simpson has only paid $132,000 of the original judgment. After decades of interest appreciation, the judgment is worth nearly $100 million. And in March 2018, Fox aired the footage from the canceled interview for the first time in the O.J. Simpson The Lost Confession. As Simpson recounts how he and his friend Charlie hypothetically murdered Ron and Nicole, it starts to sound not particularly hypothetical and more like this guy just got away with murder. Now, no one knows how much money Simpson had. He reportedly lived on his NFL and private pensions, and those payments stopped upon his death. If a person dies intestate, which means without a will, then the probate court will determine how the assets are distributed to the person's heirs and creditors. When a person has a will, those assets will be distributed through the probate process. But when a person has a trust instead of a will, the estate will generally not go through the entire probate process. Instead, the assets will be distributed under the trust name without the court involvement. And the first issue for the Goldmans is determining where Simpson's property is located. For years, the media reported that Simpson was domiciled in Florida, and any Florida property would be protected by Florida's homestead exemption. However, Simpson's will was filed with probate court in Nevada, where he died. The will appointed Las Vegas attorney Malcolm Laverne is Simpson's personal representative and executor. Laverne said he was surprised to be appointed, but he would do his best to stiff the Goldman family. He told the Las Vegas Review-Journal that, quote, "It's my hope that the Goldmans get zero, nothing. Them specifically, and I will do everything in my capacity as the executor or personal representative to try and ensure that they get nothing. Now, the executor of the will is responsible for fulfilling the stipulations in the estate plan. However, he doesn't have the legal right to pick and choose who gets money. The executor has to disperse the estate's assets, first paying taxes and covering debts. And Laverne, after lots of public scrutiny, has reversed course. Quote, "I can tell you in advance Fred Goldman's claim will be accepted, and his claim will be handled in accordance with Nevada law." And that's the right call, since the Goldmans have a judgment lien against the estate. This is known as a secured debt. When it comes to creditors, there's a pecking order. The secured creditors are first in line, and a secured creditor is one whose claim is secured by a lien in the debtor's property. An unsecured creditor doesn't have a charge on a particular asset. An unsecured credit will only be paid if there's something left over after the secured creditors have been paid. And Simpson apparently owed taxes to the IRS, so taxes will be paid first, and those with a court judgment like Goldman's are probably next in line. And the executor is subject to oversight by the probate court. And we can actually look at Simpson's will. Article 3 states that he had a revocable living trust, quote, "I give, devise, and bequeath all my property of every kind and character, wherever situated, whether community or separate, owned by me at my death, including any property over which I have power of testamentary disposition of the then acting trustee of the Orenthal Simpson Revocable Living Trust, dated January 25th, 2024, to be held, administered, and distributed according to the terms of said trust, as it now exists, or may be hereafter amended prior to my death." That will was filed by the Cassidy law offices, and Laverne wasn't aware that he had been named executor until the will was filed. So Simpson's property was placed into a revocable living trust. That's a trust that's an instrument that allows a person to bypass probate. The trust is a legal entity that Simpson created during his life, which holds all of his assets. And for the trust to be legally operable, it has to be funded. And a trust is funded if, before the person dies, he transfers title to all of his assets to the living trust. And the trustee is then responsible for gathering the trust assets and then distributing the assets to the trust death beneficiaries. Now, Simpson may have picked Nevada because its trust laws offer significant asset protection. In Nevada, a trust does not become public record, and it remains private, which means that we won't know the identity of the beneficiaries, nor what assets are held in trust or any of its terms. Most states tax trust income, but Nevada doesn't. And Nevada allows a person to create a self-settled spendthrift trust, which are commonly referred to as a domestic asset protection trust, or DAPT. These trusts let the person who creates the trust to protect the assets from the reach of personal creditors. And Nevada is just one of two states that don't have exception creditors to spendthrift trusts. Exception creditors are certain classes of creditors who can penetrate the trust despite there being a DAPT in place. However, we don't know whether Simpson's trust meets the requirements of being a domestic asset protection trust. And the will calls the trust a revocable living trust that was established in January of 2024. In order for the trust to offer maximum asset protection, it needs to be irrevocable. And revocable trusts are generally not free from creditors. And the Goldmans can still file a claim against that trust. And David Cook, the lawyer for the Goldman family, said, quote, "We have to start over here. We're going to work on that. There might be something out there. We've had this problem for a long time. It could be in a trust. It could be probate. It could be all gone." But if you're like O.J. Simpson and you're going to go on TV and admit hypothetically to murdering people, you probably want a good clean shave to at least look innocent, which you can do with today's sponsor, Henson Shaving. Henson is a great way to get a perfect shave without breaking the bank on crazy expensive cartridges. Now, you all know me as the beard-wearing legal eagle lawyer, but I'll admit there's nothing that'll get a jury more suspicious of you than looking unkempt and sloppy. So keeping at least my neck and cheekbones clean is of utmost importance, or in the summer when I just shave it off, which is where Henson comes in. For the longest time, I've been using those insanely expensive razors with the disposable 5-blade heads, which So we're doing third terms now. Yes, last week the media dropped a story that they considered an absolute bombshell. Donald Trump says he hasn't ruled out running for a third term. Now, it seems like we've been through this before on this channel, and I didn't expect to have to relitigate this question quite so soon. So everyone, listen up. The Constitution does not give President Trump the power to serve a third term. The 22nd Amendment says he cannot do it. And while I agree it's important to take most of Trump's threats seriously, America is in immediate and serious danger because of the challenge that Trump poses to the rule of law. So let's try and keep our eyes on the ball because he's threatening to burn America's justice system to the ground right now. With that being said, today let's summarize the law in the 22nd Amendment, its history, and the reasons why we need to stop focusing on emergencies that are 4 years in the future, and then never talk about this ever.
I love indie games.
Gojo vs. Suka.
Химера — это любое животное, состоящее из клеток с разной ДНК. В мире людей одна из самых известных историй, связанных с химеризмом, история Лидии Фэрчайлд. В 2002 году она подавала на алименты на 2 детей и должна была подтвердить материнство с помощью обычного ДНК-теста. Но неожиданно из теста Лидия узнала, что ее дети не ее дети. Лидию были готовы обвинить в мошенничестве. В этот момент Лидия была беременна 3-м ребенком. На последнем месяце. Рожать его пришлось при свидетелях. Лидии и младенцу сделали тесты, и они снова показали, что мать не мать. Наконец нашелся пытливый адвокат, который раскопал аналогичный случай с другой женщиной, у которой был обнаружен химеризм. Это редкое отклонение, при котором у человека 2 набора ДНК. Один набор его, другой условно-потенциального близнеца, который был бы братом или сестрой, если бы клетки их зародышей в утробе не соединились в один организм. Лидии провели очередные тесты и, наконец, в мазке из шейки матки нашли таки потерянный набор ДНК. Дело было закрыто. Химера — это любое животное, состоящее из клеток с разной ДНК.
Aura farming is the new way of sitting back on farming moments that make a person look cool. It's a spin-off meme from the idea of collecting aura or aura points, which blew up as a concept early last year. It's not as if aura farming wasn't a concept back then, it's just that 2025 has seen it explode into unimaginable new heights. It's worth noting that the term is most often associated with anime, especially the adaptation of South Korean manhwa, Solo Leveling. Solo Leveling is excellent. Its only purpose is sheer power hype, as the main character manages to get stronger and stronger with every single challenge he faces. I highly recommend it if you want something to watch that requires no thought, only fun, as it hits all the cliches and knows exactly what it's doing each time. This is why it's so often associated with the idea of aura farming. Main character Jinwoo just looks cool 99% of the time, and because he wins every time, he always hits the hardest poses for no reason other than to farm aura. The idea of looking cool in public has also become a consistent theme across social media, with many putting their own spin on aura farming, aka farming aura points, as per last year's trend in real-life activities. The idea of signing papers as if a person is famous is a common bit too, and the internet has seen multiple takes on it. After all, most humans...
What?
have a very distinct need to feel like they are special in some way.
You might be wondering why this slab has a huge bite taken out of it. A year ago, a client reached out wanting a big round dining table. So I went to GL Veneer and found this, one of the prettiest Clara walnut slabs I'd ever seen. Seriously, here's what it looked like in the end. Now I knew that there was no way that this slab was going to be big enough for the table, so I bought two. And as soon as I started marking things up, I realized that I was going to use most of the first slab, but hardly any of the second one. And that gave me the idea to set this piece aside to build some sort of desk where you'd sit here, and it's like a command center where everything wraps around you. So that's our starting point, and that's why this slab has a huge bite taken out of it, and this video is sponsored by Shopify. So I don't imagine that this is going to be your Monday through Friday 9 to 5 kind of desk. I think it's more of a occasionally send a few emails and the rest of the time just sit there and look pretty kind of desk. Like a highly incompetent but very attractive assistant. Hey Dolores, have I had any calls? Exactly. Now historically a typical desktop has been about 30 inches wide, and if you were to sit dead center on this desk, it isn't. In fact, it's barely over 12 inches. But as long as you rotate your position like this or this, it gets way deeper. And honestly, I think the idea of a 30-inch deep desktop is kind of outdated. Like maybe it made sense when people had huge CRT monitors, but we don't anymore. Actually, I got curious, so I just measured the width of the usable area on the desk that I use every day, and it's about 21.5 inches. So again, for light duty work, like the occasional email, this desk is gonna be fine. Now on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, on these wings here, this top is much deeper than a typical desk, about 44 inches. But I'm gonna trim these back a bit because the extra width here doesn't really provide any more usable desk space. Honestly, it seems like it would just be a spot to set stuff on that you're going to eventually knock off with your elbows, and leaving it needlessly wide with these nice sharp corners kind of seems like a recipe for some painful bumps. Okay, after I cut these straight edges on the slab, I'm gonna have a few hours of removing bark and cleaning things up ahead of me. And whenever I do this type of stuff that's, you know, kind of time consuming but doesn't really take a whole lot of thinking, my mind will wander. And here I pondered the age-old philosophical question: at what point does a leftover piece of wood become a scrap? So I looked at a few definitions, and believe it or not, some online conversations that have taken place about this very topic. And for some people, it seems to be personal and kind of relative to what they build. For example, let's say that Chuck here runs a business producing novelty wooden sporks, and they have to be at least 48 inches long and made from one piece of wood. Well, to Chuck, anything shorter than 48 inches might be considered a scrap. But let's say, I don't know, Chris here makes fancy mechanical pencils. I don't know why you would do that. That would be a really weird market to go into. But anyway, to him, a piece might not become a scrap until it was shorter than about 6 inches. These are made from brass, by the way, not wood. Having said that, I wanted to find a more strict definition, and the best that I could find was any leftover wood that remains after cutting parts for a project. So this raises the question, on this particular slab, is this the scrap? Or is this the scrap? I mean, this is clearly the bigger piece, but it's also technically the leftover wood that remains after cutting parts for a project. Honestly, I feel like there's probably a good case to be made for either or neither of the chunks being the scrap. But if we're willing to stretch the truth, even just a little bit, and call this piece a scrap, then I think that this desk might end up being the greatest scrap project of all time. Or at least my greatest. Now, in all seriousness, I don't think that this is a scrap project. I would actually classify this one under what I would call an opportunity project. And what I mean by that is anytime that you see the shape of a piece and it gives you the idea or the opportunity to build a project that you might not have otherwise. And I think that this desk is a perfect example of that, because I can't imagine a situation where I would start with a perfectly intact slab and then think to myself,
really
yeah, I'm just going to cut a huge arc right out of the middle and make a command center desk. Yet when I was faced with that as a starting point, it kind of felt like a no-brainer. It's almost like it designed itself or something. Anyway, that's enough of the philosophical scrap debate. Plus, now we're coming up on the first potential problem that we might run into with this build.
I don't know if I'd really call it a problem, but I guess maybe more what I'm thinking about is, so this slab along the edge here, the live edge, it really cuts back in under itself quite a bit. And that means it gets like really thin here on what I'm planning to have be the top side. And I don't want it to, you know, break really easily if somebody's gonna bump into it with something or whatever someday. So normally that's not a problem, because take the circle table, for example, that the slab built previously. Typically the outside where it's fragile actually becomes the inside of the table, and then the outside of the table is the inside of the slab. Again, no problem. You get a nice solid corner there, a nice solid edge rather. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about. But then also I need to pour a bunch of epoxy in this, but there's no good way to really build a form for this kind of shape without totally encasing the side in epoxy, which I don't want to do. So I actually did this on a prior video where I basically just put this drop cloth down and built like a above ground swimming pool, and it worked really well. Like the epoxy doesn't stick to it at all. It's watertight, it's great. But this is a different situation because I don't want any epoxy on the outside. So I think what I'm going to do is just pour some fast curing epoxy to hopefully seal everything up, and then I can pour the deep pour epoxy and hopefully not have it encase the live edge with epoxy, which I don't want to happen. And once we get to that point, then I'll have a better idea of what's going on. Worst case scenario, if that were to happen, or even honestly just to make this a robust edge, I might have to recut the live edge as best as I can, try to kind of follow the natural grain. That way I have a nice 90-degree drop off and I don't have those little fragile bits hanging out. It's not gonna look as cool if I do that because this live edge actually looks really cool from the side. It has all these little nubs that kind of look like alien for lack of a better term. But you know, if you gotta lose the alien, you gotta lose them. So we'll try our best to keep them, but no promises.
So you saw me pour that first thin layer of the fast setting epoxy, and now this is the next day and I'm mixing up some Total Boat thick set Fathom. And as you might have guessed from that name, one of the upsides here is that you can pour this stuff way thicker and it'll still set. Can you fathom that? But the downside is that it takes way longer to cure, usually about a week or two depending on the time of the year. Now my hunch at this point is that the cracks in this slab are like a maze on the inside. Basically I'm betting that there are way more voids than what you can see just by looking at the surface. And a pretty obvious telltale sign of that is whenever you notice this happening. But that's actually what I'm hoping for in this case, because the alternative is that it's just literally going into one crack and then coming out the other side. But because I don't know for sure one way or the other right now, I'm not just gonna keep pouring epoxy. And instead what I'm gonna do is stop and then let it set up for about, I don't know, 48 hours or so. And at this point, it's gonna be the consistency of maybe like somewhere between cold fudge and an airhead. But either way thicker than what it would need to be to continue just spilling out. And now based on its current consistency, along with what I can see seeped out from the underside, I'm pretty confident that I can mix up more of the thick set and then top everything off. Now I have no doubt that after this cures and we get everything surfaced and cleaned up, there's definitely going to be a bunch of problem areas that we're going to uncover, but my hope is that this is going to get us like 95% of it.
On the loose. Get to work. Lolling. Eat Papa. Get.
All right. Settle down. Here we are. It's about 2 weeks later, and I'm happy to report that there were no major leaks in the epoxy. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the roof in my shop. Thankfully, none of it damaged my equipment though, so I'll take it. Now, the last time that I did this plastic drop sheet form thing, I did a really bad job of showing just how easily it comes off. So I'm gonna try to improve upon that here. So, I don't know, does that do it? I think the irony is that it's really difficult to show when the slab comes out easily, but it's very easy to show when it's difficult to get the slab out. That's irony, right? Alanis Morissette, if you're watching this, let me know in the comments. Anyway, this whole plastic sheet thing, I gotta say, this is where it's at. The only downside that I found so far is this. Obviously, we'll still remove all of this stuff, but I would say that if you're in a situation where you need to preserve every millimeter of thickness of your slab, these ripples make it a little bit more difficult. Now on this slab, I happen to have a lot of thickness to play with, so not a concern, but on larger dining tables, that doesn't always tend to be the case, so I don't know, just something to think about.
Hold the line.
So you know how there's that one spot that everybody has in their house where they put like half-dead batteries, rubber bands, maybe a pen that doesn't work anymore, a Radio Shack receipt from 2006? Well, my family's always called that a junk drawer. And I'm not sure if the rest of the world uses that term, but call it whatever you want. I'm sure most of us have one at home. Well, at my shop, and I'm not proud of this, I have a cousin of the junk drawer, the junk corner. I mean, I don't think there's any Radio Shack receipts in here, but I could definitely get rid of like 30% of the stuff that I stash away over there. That said, occasionally it can really pay off to keep a junk corner. And today was that day. And that's because buried amongst all of the scraps and the offcuts that I keep here, between the wall and the organized part of the junk corner, I found literally the perfect arc template that I needed to cut the semicircle for where a person's gonna sit. I don't know when I made this or why I kept it, but I'm thankful I did. Now, in full disclosure, could I have made myself a new template in about 5 minutes? Yeah, but why do that when you can hold on to a piece for 3 years in the off chance that you might be able to use it for something eventually? It's the same reason you hold on to that Radio Shack receipt. Sure, they went out of business in 2015, but if they ever reopen and you need to return that universal remote, you don't want any questions, and you're going to be damn glad that you kept it. By the way, check out this La La Land looking bull out here. Alright, I'm stalling. Let's just get to the bad news. We got the slab cleaned up, and I knew that this slab was really gnarly here, but I was hoping it would fill in a little bit better than it has. So I started kind of going through my normal process, which is typically after I do my major pour, I'll do another pour to kind of fill stuff in. Then from there, I'll do a lot of little touch-up work with epoxy. And then whatever that can't get, I move on to using this stuff called hot melt. It's basically like a black hot glue stick, essentially, that you can kind of melt and jam it into little cracks. And then whatever that can't get, I'll use black CA glue. I could probably fill in most of this, but if there's a lot of it like this is a pretty heavy concentration, it's not gonna look good. I mean, it'll be okay, but this is too much of a focal point and you're gonna be sitting right at it that I wouldn't be happy with it. So I think what I'm gonna do is patch the really bad spots using offcuts from this slab, which I think looks really cool. I know it can be kind of a polarizing look, but typically with a slab, yeah, the grain is going to be pretty wavy, but for the most part, it's going to go a certain way. Here, it really doesn't. It kind of flows this way and then almost wraps around this way. So when I patch these pieces, it's going to be kind of weird to figure out what way the grain is supposed to go to perfectly align so that it looks its best and functionally will hold up well over time. I feel like it's the best solution at this point. You know, I can keep going and put lipstick on a pig, but ultimately, I think it'll be a better piece for it in the end, so let's give it a shot and see how that goes. So I've had to do this patch thing one other time on a project. Well, maybe kind of 1.5 times. But the main time that I did it, the reaction was, I would say, polarizing, but slightly negative. Like I'd guess that 60% of the comments that were specifically about the patches were closer to this than they were to this. That said, I think and hope that it's going to be a little bit more positively received this time. Mainly because on that other project, I used a mix of black walnut, Clara walnut, and sapwood for the patches to kind of highlight the fact that they were there, rather than making them more subdued like I'm going to here. Now, on that first table, the reason that I had to do it was kind of similar to the reason that I'm having to do it here, and that was because of some rotten wood. But the other time that I had to sort of do it was on this table where I accidentally cut a huge gouge right into the top, like right at the 11th hour. Now here's what's kind of weird though. That time, when I was completely the one to blame, the comments were mostly positive. And my hunch is that the reason for the different reactions might actually have more to do with psychology than it does with tables. So if we're being completely realistic and, you know, we take exaggeration off the table, I think that both fixes probably are going to slightly lower a person's opinion of the tables. Like if the average review that somebody might give this table with this top was an 8.5 out of 10, then maybe with this top it would be, I don't know, like an 8.7 or something. But I doubt that many people would realistically say, I absolutely love this table and I hate this one, or vice versa. But I think that the reason that in the comments people skewed towards liking the circle table fix and hating the coffee table fix was that the story of the circle table is guy royally f***ed up at the end of a project and then has to try to redeem himself. Whereas the story with the coffee table was guy has to do a fix on a slab that looks like it was mostly fine to begin with. Or maybe people just felt sorry for me and wanted to be encouraging. So I guess the question with this one is, how will it be received this time? The pessimist in me says negatively because it's like the coffee table where I'm doing patches on a slab that to some people might look like it was fine to begin with. But the optimist in me says positively because like the circle table, it's the story of redemption where I'm going back to something that people didn't really love the first time, but trying to do it better this time. I guess in the end, it's just probably going to come down to how well I actually pull it off.
Exploration and
So
trials.
let's set the top aside for a bit and get to
Adventuring
the
is
rest
right
of the
up
desk.
my alley.
So when it comes to design, I don't really have any concrete rules, but one general guideline that I like to stick to is that I try not to pair a complex base with a complex top. For example, this is what I would call a complex base. And I don't mean complex as in difficult to build, but more, I guess, visually complex. And that base I paired with this top, which I would say is more on the visually simple side. Nice simple round shape,
wet.
and as the
must be
grain of a
uncomfortable.
slab top can go,
Let's take
I
a
would say
break.
on the more
I'll use
subdued
my
side of
fire
things.
to dry you off.
Whereas something like this top, which has more character in the grain, it's got these brass details,
Instead
I would
of
say that this is
confining
more visually
themselves to the
complex
heavens,
as a slab top
God
can
should
go.
broaden their horizons
And when
in
I'm
the
using
world
something like
below.
this, I want to make sure that it's the focal point. So for example, that one I paired with a much more visually simple base compared to that other one. So the cliff notes there is, generally speaking, I don't mind pairing simple with simple or simple with complex, but I try not to pair complex with complex. Now, when it comes to desks specifically, I would say that I tend to skew more towards the complex side of things. And that's probably because one of the great things about a desk is that they can be asymmetrical. Like with a dining table, 99 times out of 100, you're gonna want it to be symmetrical because a bunch of people need to be able to gather around it and it's just gonna function better that way. But with a desk, you kind of have like zones. Maybe you sit in the middle and then you got a little storage on one side, and you get what I'm saying. And my favorite desks that I've designed have followed that exact formula. Storage on one side and some kind of crazy leg on the other. So with this one, I want to follow that formula again. And with both of those desks that I just showed, I would call those bases visually complex. And we already know roughly what the top of this desk is going to look like. And again, I would say it's also visually complex. And I just got finished yapping about how I try not to pair complex with complex. So the challenge here is really going to be to just try to restrain myself. And essentially to try to do a more simple or subdued version of one of these kinds of bases. And that doesn't mean that it needs to be boring. It just needs to have a more subtle kind of beauty. Like a Ferrari 288 GTO versus a Lamborghini Countach. Or a Telecaster versus a Flying V. An Eames lounge chair versus this guy's ball chair. Aero Arneo? I don't know. The point is, all of them are beautiful, and no matter which you prefer as a car, chair, or guitar, you're not gonna get an argument from me. But I would bet that most of us would agree that the three on the left side have a more subtle kind of beauty, where the three on the right have a more in-your-face kind of beauty. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, if the base on this desk is a Lamborghini, then the one that I'm trying to build here is gonna be more like the Ferrari. The other day I got a pretty strange compliment. I'll paraphrase, but a guy said that he would give his left nut to have a shop as big as mine. I told him that the good news was that he could keep it because all it actually takes is about $5,000 per month in rent. And I haven't asked, but I'm pretty sure that my landlord prefers cash over that. Anyway, conversations like that will pop up from time to time, and they always lead to the one big question. How can I afford it? And I get it, people are curious. And the truth is, it's thanks to companies like this video's sponsor, Shopify. Most of the money that I make comes from the things that I sell, like the Brass Chunky mechanical pencil and Sample 73 wood finish. And something that I learned quickly was to lean into what you're good at and pay for what you're not. Take Brass Chunky. I love designing, but I don't know anything about working with metal, so I focused on designing and refining prototypes and let a metal shop handle fabrication. Then when it was time to sell them, I did my research and I chose Shopify. Because just like with metalwork, I don't know how to code, but I can drag and drop things to put together and maintain a storefront. I don't know anything about international sales, but I can use managed markets to take care of local payment methods, duties, and taxes. I don't know how to run advanced analytics, but I can use LiveView to see real-time data about where, who, and how people are browsing my store. And while I am good at designing stuff and pretty good at writing copy, if I weren't, I could use Shopify Magic to write better product descriptions, improve product images, and craft more effective emails. Shopify has been a game changer for my business and my life. And if you're starting or you have an existing business or even just an idea, you owe it to yourself to give them a look. Just go to shopify.com/4eyes where you can start a free trial and learn more about how they can help you grow your business. Thanks, Shopify. So just like we were talking about earlier, the overall leg shape that I'm doing here is pretty subtle. But to give it a little more detail, or just a little something extra that people who really spend time looking at a piece might notice and appreciate, rather than making the shape how I normally would, I made it where the stretcher is kind of integrated into the leg. And I thought about maybe even taking this further and highlighting it by maybe putting like a chamfer on the pieces or something like that. But then I stopped and reminded myself, be subtle. Not every single component needs to be the star. I mean, maybe a team of 5 Michael Jordans would be great, but you can still win a championship with a couple of Judd Bushlers. When we last saw the slab, we had just done our first round of epoxy touch-up. And now we're gonna get to see how well that actually filled in all of the remaining holes. And if I'm being honest, not great. I'll say slightly worse than normal, and I think that's just because this slab is a little bit rougher than what I typically work with. And here's the next plan of attack. So I'm going through and identifying all the problem areas, and some of the larger holes like this, I'm gonna take one more crack at filling with epoxy, but some of the medium holes are actually the tricky ones. On these I've already tried and failed with epoxy, and I don't wanna fill these with the hot melt or CA glue. So what I'm gonna do is drill them out and fill them with plugs. So what I'm gonna try to do is use my offcuts to get a variety of colors. In this shot, you can see that I'm cutting plugs from some of the sapwood on the slab. And then once I've made a bunch in various tones, I'm just gonna have to go through and fill the lighter spots with lighter plugs and the darker spots with darker plugs. And whenever you do this on a slab, it's kind of a crapshoot. I mean, you try your best, obviously, but the grain on the slabs is so wild that you never really know until you've sanded everything off. And my hunch going in is that probably 80% of them will come out good, and the rest won't. But either way, now we have to let this epoxy cure, so we'll keep working and then we'll take it from there. So sticking with that whole car analogy thing from earlier, the next thing that we need to do is make a box, which I guess doesn't really sound like it has anything to do with cars. Glove box? Gearbox? Whatever. What I actually mean is that whole subtle but still beautiful thing, the Ferrari versus Lamborghini analogy. So I've never actually been up close to a Ferrari, but I would assume that they have a really nice fit and finish. And what you're seeing here is the level of detail that it takes to have a really nice fit and finish when you're making a box. And I'm not going to cover it in detail because I can make an hour-long video on just that topic, but I will point out a couple of key things. So the type of box that we're going to be making is a mitered box. And that just means that we're going to cut 45-degree bevels on all of the ends so that the joint on each corner is a miter. It's not the fanciest type of box, but I think it's the best type of box. It's the cleanest. The worst kind of box probably has butt joints, and the fanciest would have dovetails. They're like the Fiat and Bugatti of boxes. Now there are plenty of reasons that a person might opt for a miter box, and one of the major ones is grain wrap, which is where the grain of the wood looks like it perfectly flows around the outside of the box. And that's the reason that you see me doing all this labeling and numbering on all the pieces during this part of the process, where what I'm doing is prepping the pieces to make 4 panels that I'll need for the box. Now there's lots of ways to do this, and the most obvious one would allow you to skip a lot of the organizing that I'm having to do, and that would be to take your longboards, glue them up into a big panel, and then cut them into the 4 smaller panels. The reason that I cut my boards short in the beginning though, was because of this. You see how bent these boards are? Well, to make a great box, you want flat panels. And I could flatten this long board, but in doing that, I'm gonna have to make the board a lot thinner, which I don't wanna do. Thankfully, if you cut a long bent board into smaller pieces, you significantly reduce the amount of bend, and it requires a lot less thicknessing to make flat. So the trade-off is a little more organizing in exchange for some much thicker panels. So you can see we've got a good basis for a nice Ferrari quality grain wrap here. And really then it's just a matter of doing your best to cut perfect 45-degree bevels on each end. And here's a little trick if you feel like you have trouble doing that. Obviously you want to always aim for perfection, but if you're going to have a little error, instead of setting your blade to 45 degrees, you can try setting it to like 45.1. Basically tilt it ever so slightly farther than 45. So we'll look at a really extreme example where a person would have set their blade to 5 degrees past, so 50, which isn't even possible. But as you can see, what would happen is that your outside points would be good, but you would have gaps on the inside. Where if you didn't go far enough, you would end up with this. And again, remember, we're talking about 1/10 of a degree, so really it's gonna be more like this. And if you end up with a situation like this, it's probably just gonna clamp out or could really easily be fixed with glue and sanding. Now, tips and concepts like this I would classify as intermediate level woodworking, but if you're looking to start woodworking, or maybe you're still pretty new to it, I just created an online woodworking course with my buddies John and Sean called The Best Beginner Woodworking Course, period. Where we cover all the basics, we build 4 projects, you can go through it at your own pace, you have lifetime access, and it's got a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if that sounds like something that you would be interested in, I'm gonna leave a link in the description so that you can check it out. And if you feel like you're maybe already more advanced than that, maybe check out one of our woodworking plan project courses. We got a ton of cool projects to pick from, and I really think you'll like them. And if you're not interested in either, no worries. Honestly, the fact that you watch these videos is enough for me, and I really do appreciate it, so thank you. Okay, this slab is officially kicking my ass. I've probably spent like another 20 hours off camera trying to fix this thing. So I think I'm actually gonna switch gears and go through the finishing process on the slab to kind of get a better idea of what it's gonna look like to make sure that I'm gonna be happy with it. So that's gonna be a lot of sanding, a lot of finishing to see what it's gonna look like. Hopefully it'll look better as I get it to that point and I'll be happy with it and we can move on. I guess worst case scenario is I hate it and then I don't know what I'll do. But meanwhile, I got a lot of other components to still finish off, so that's what I'm gonna do. Here I'm gonna make some drawer boxes, 3 to be exact, which is not the most fun thing to do or probably watch, but I didn't want to just completely skip it and have drawers magically appear in the cabinet. So while I was building and filming this, it got me thinking, how accurately, or maybe inaccurately, do I represent actually building something in these videos as far as time is concerned? So for example, imagine that like 10% of the time that I spent building a project, I was standing behind my table saw making cuts. Well, if that were true, then would roughly 10% of the video end up being me standing behind the table saw making cuts? Probably not. And I'm not about to sit here and track and calculate everything to find out, but then that got me thinking, what are the biggest or most obvious places where time isn't represented accurately? And there was one pretty obvious one that immediately came to mind. So this would be something that takes forever but barely makes it into a video. And I would say that that's sanding. I'd guess that on a given project I'll spend maybe 10 hours sanding, but only about 10 seconds is gonna make its way into a video, thankfully. But then when it came to the opposite, so this would be something that doesn't take very long at all, yet gets featured very heavily in a video, that was a little tougher. It took me a minute to think of something, but I think I got a good one. Pouring epoxy. I just went back and looked, and there are 57 seconds of me pouring epoxy in this video, and I probably spent about 10 minutes of real time pouring epoxy. So basically, 1/10 of the time that I spent pouring epoxy is represented in the video, where about 1/3600th of the time that I spent sanding is represented in this video. By the way, this dramatic lighting isn't me trying to look cool. There's an hour each afternoon where the sun comes blindingly flooding into my shop right at the table saw, so the looking cool is just a byproduct. Now that we have the drawer boxes, we need drawer faces. And the way that I do this is a little counterintuitive. So you would think that the best way to do this would be to take a board, cut your 3 drawer faces to size, and attach them. And it kind of looks like that's what I'm about to do here, but it's not. The better way to do it is to make a panel that's slightly larger than the entire opening of your cabinet, and then split that into your faces. And there's 3 reasons. First is that whenever I'm making drawer faces, almost every time at least one of them is going to be wider than the plank of wood that I'm using. For example, on this box, the bottom drawer face is going to be about 9 inches wide, but my board is only about 8 inches. So making a panel isn't really going to take me any extra time because no matter what, I'm going to need to glue something together and wait for it to dry. Then the second reason is because if I'm doing that, the top and middle drawer would probably look good, but the bottom one is probably going to look a little goofy because it's going to look like a narrow strip attached to a wide panel. Now, one way around this would be to make that 9-inch panel out of 2 pieces that are about 4.5 inches wide. But even if you do that, making a big panel and then splitting it into your 3 drawer faces after is going to do a better job of blending the transition from one drawer face to the next. And the third and biggest reason, and this is where it's going to sound counterintuitive, is that it's actually easier to do it this way. And to understand why, it's probably helpful to look at an extreme example. So imagine that you were building a box shaped like this. Well, if you do it the panel way, you would make your oversized panel, mimic the opening, and then rip the individual faces to 7.5 inches wide, and you would get nice gaps. But if you tried doing it out of individual boards, you'd still have to nail whatever angle this is, but you're also going to end up having to cut 3 pieces to very specific lengths to get nice consistent gaps, which is easier said than done. Long story short, you're basically just removing a bunch of human error by doing it the panel way. Now, I build a fair amount of cabinets that are irregular shaped like this, but even if you only build quote unquote square cabinets, there's plenty of times that those square cabinets come out slightly unsquare. And they're usually going to be close enough that the human eye doesn't notice that it's out of square unless you have inconsistent gaps. Then it becomes really obvious. Like, look at this box. It's probably pretty difficult to tell that it's a 1/16 of an inch out of square. But if all of your gaps are consistent, except for one of them that's a 1/16 of an inch off, it's pretty obvious. And while we're on the topic of counterintuitive woodworking things, this is one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear from a lot of beginners. And if you haven't seen these tricks before, I think you're really gonna like them. But let me quickly tell you what I'm about to do so that you have some context. So we need to make a base for the cabinet, which is gonna consist of 2 pieces that form a plus shape using what's called a half lap joint. So the misconception is that intuitively you would think that to make a perfect fitting joint, you'd want to be really good at precisely measuring and marking things. But actually, to get the best joint, you really don't want to rely on measuring things at all. So I'm going to be starting here with my 2 pieces, which are milled to about 1 3/4 of an inch thick and ripped to 3 1/4 inches wide. And they're also a few inches longer than whatever they're going to need to be in the end. Now the first step is going to be that we need to lock in the height of our blade. And we want that to be exactly half of this dimension. What I'm going to do is keep the offcut from when I cut my piece to length and use that to perfectly dial in the blade height. So we're going to start by raising the blade so that it's about halfway up, maybe just a little bit shy. And the mark that I have here is just to get us in the general area. I'm not trying to hit that line with the blade. And then what we're going to do is take a test cut, flip the piece over, and take another test cut. And if you have a little bit of material left here, then you know you want to raise your blade a little bit more. Technically, you're going to want to raise it half of whatever the size of this sliver is. But again, we're not going to measure it. We're just going to tick it up a little bit, and keep doing that until either we're left with a hair-thin sliver or it just kind of chips off like what you can see here. And once that happens, we know that our blade height is almost perfect. Perfect enough at least, so we'll lock it down. Alright, so that's half the battle, and now the other half is cutting a notch into each piece that perfectly matches the thickness of the other piece. Again, no measuring. Instead, I'm going to use one piece to mark the other about halfway along the length, and then I'm going to use a stop block and my other work piece to set up the cut like this, and then we can go ahead and make the first cut. After doing that, I can remove this workpiece and slide over the piece that I'm cutting to make the second cut. But here's the important part. If I made the cut now, it's going to be too wide by exactly the thickness of my blade, which happens to be 1/8 of an inch. So I made this little shim that I keep handy by my table saw that said an 1/8 inch drill bit would also work. But either way, I'm going to insert that between my stop block and the piece that I'm cutting, and now it's going to be perfectly sized. Then from there, I can just clear out the material in between. So once I've done this on the first piece to make the first half lap, I can just repeat this exact process on the other one, and they should perfectly mate together. Now, if you're brand new to all this, I get that it might sound a lot more complicated than just measuring and dividing by 2, setting things to those dimensions, and then cutting. But I bet if you watch this part 1 or 2 more times, it'll make total sense. Now, the only part I will measure and mark, and then cut to the line, is to hit the final length dimension. And this is why I had left them long initially.
Okay, let's do that. Try to do that again.
This guy looks so arrogant. Maybe I should take a tougher approach with him.
Quit the act. I've seen right through you. You may look harmless. Your crafty skills have caused, not to mention, your true identity, a member of the most infamous band.
That's nonsense. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and I haven't done anything wrong.
Exactly. If you're so confident in your judgment, why not call PubSec? I'm sure they'd be delighted to apprehend this Mockingbird Phantom thief on the spot.
All right, jeez, I was just guessing. Forget it. Clearly, you have no idea who I am. I'm Curtis Ravenlock. That's right, of the esteemed Ravenlock family from Tops. You'll face consequences for crossing me.
You're an esteemed member of Tops. Why join a raffle with us plebs?
Offense is the best defense. Seems like you've got that down.
I'm only here because my family sponsored this event. I just joined the raffle for fun. It's not like I actually need the bunny. Anyway, you were the only one next to me when I lost my wallet. It has to be you. Just admit it.
Let's go like this.
Listen, you can't just throw accusations around. You'll be held accountable for what you say. I did not steal your wallet. But if you insist that I did, let's go to PubSec together. Of course, if you can't prove it, I'll be pressing charges against you.
Press charges? That's a bit too extreme, don't you think?
Looks like you found the right approach to deal with people like him.
In any case, my wallet is missing. It had a ton of Denny's, so someone's got to answer for that.
I bet you staged all this, and your wallet's been on you the whole time.
What do you mean by staged? Why would I do that? Someone stole my wallet. It's theft!
With all due respect, I doubt he's clever enough to stage anything. Clearly, your accusation is baseless, Mr. Ravenlock.
Okay, let's try to make the last one count.
We know that wherever we cut the half laps is going to be the center of the joint. So if I just measure and mark out the same on all 4 cuts, that will remain the center. And it's just a lot easier to do it that way rather than cutting things to length beforehand and then having to try to make that half lap end up in what already is the center of the workpiece. Okay, we're on the home stretch. At this point, all of the major components are made, and the last thing that I need to think about is how I'm gonna assemble everything. And with a piece like this, it's important that it can go together and come apart easily so that you can move it. So for the leg, if I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, I could do some attachments that go up through the bottom stretcher and into the top. But I'm gonna make these perpendicular attachment pieces that I think look nicer and will also spread the distance over which the leg is attached to the top. So after I get the notches for those cut into the top of the leg, I'm going to do this roundover detail on the leg and then cut it to its final length. And for the attachment pieces, I'm going to do a similar roundover on the underside to make them match. And also because the notches have that same radius cut into them,
really?
I have to do it or they wouldn't physically fit. Now these could technically be glued together, but I'm going to use hardware because I want to be able to take the leg apart for shipping purposes. I'm afraid that if it gets shipped like this, these pieces are kind of fragile, and if something gets bumped, it could break, so I just don't want to chance it. And I'm going to be attaching pretty much everything the same way, so I'm just going to show it one time in detail. So for these specifically, the leg is going to get some threaded inserts installed into each joint. And then in the attachment pieces, I'm going to use a Forstner bit to make a large hole that's about 1/2 inch deep. And then I'm going to drill some smaller holes that go all the way through. That way I can attach everything.
This looks like... Once again... This just doesn't want to work. And Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact also doesn't want to work. What the hell? Alright, that's going to be it for the stream. Good luck, have fun, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.